Chapter 76, The Visit. Eris's attitude gradually changed. Instead of imitating her grandfather Sarios, she was becoming more like Gilgamesh. This was something very different and special that had completely changed her day-to-day life. She received not only physical training but also learned a character that was only used by the person she admired the most until now. Gilgamesh never looked down on a servant, he never insulted those who didn't deserve it, and he sought to occasionally boast about his precious skills. But under no circumstances did he give importance to people beneath him, and if he was now training Eris, it was because she would be his betrothed, and he saw a special aura in her that, if maintained, could make her worthy of him. Many might think that Gilgamesh's standards were very high for what he expected from a woman, but they say that the woman you marry will reflect in the future what a man is worth, and vice versa. He understood perfectly what he could offer, so he expected the minimum from a woman who might share with him perhaps the last moments of his life. He had never married, having lived and died as a mortal, so there was no one who understood the value of marriage better than him. He wanted to make a good choice and not succumb solely to skin-deep appearances. When he looked at Eris, he saw many things that could happen in the future, things he would have preferred not to have seen. However, now that he knew that she might even give her life for him if their relationship grew stronger, he knew that the least he could do was train her and look after her. But he was not so presumptuous as to think that this was set in stone and had to be that way. He understood the laws of fate and knew the variant effects he was causing in this place with his sudden appearance, so he knew that anything could happen if he wished it. Should he remain indifferent or delve into what he had seen? From that moment on, he stopped using that ability on women because he didn't want to discover any surprises that might put him in a state of different thoughts. He had heard of the human god and something happening with one of his wives, but he didn't know if it was just one or perhaps more. Nevertheless, he now had to take care of Eris just to ease his conscience. He wouldn't want to know now, it wasn't as fun. As Gilgamesh was resting, he heard some faint footsteps that he immediately recognized as Eris's. She didn't make much noise and sat down beside him while looking at the sky. She never thought that her life would change so radically just because of the presence of the Red Prince she had talked about so much. The rule for every strong man and woman is that they cannot be taken by surprise, Eris. Gilgamesh opened his eyes, but his attitude stopped being so gentle, and he began to behave more and more like he would with anyone else. And I must assess how strong an opponent is before even drawing my sword, I understand perfectly. Eris was also much calmer, with a serene aura that gave the impression of being in the presence of a woman with strong character. You have an entirely different ethics from mine when it comes to deciding to fight, but remember that you should always go all the way and not stop halfway. Gilgamesh turned his head on the grass where Eris lay. He smiled slightly and murmured, I will teach you to understand the value of the earth, honest work, and the bravery of a commoner. Is it important to understand those things? Eris asked the same question that Gilgamesh had asked his friend Enkidu when he taught him the importance of life, and after that, he was considered the greatest king of his time. Touch the earth, Eris, feel its vitality, and understand where life comes from. When you come to understand the true value of coexistence, which not only includes your personal ruggedness in life, you will know that you have achieved wisdom in this life. Gilgamesh spoke these words as if he were talking to his younger self, someone who needed a friend with whom to share these kinds of moments. He had also noticed that Eris had no friends, she was alone, just like him, so that was also one of the reasons why he would stay here until this mana concentration was completely eliminated from this place. But very few people our age understand that. Gilgamesh didn't want to put undue pressure on Eris to make her think she should understand this when it took him more than 30 years to do so. Do you already know all of this? Eris, who had become accustomed to the special aura that Gilgamesh emitted, didn't feel any emotion that would disorient her from his refined behavior. Who knows? Maybe it has changed in this place. Everything is constantly changing, including our destiny. Gilgamesh smiled pleasantly, making it this time impossible for Eris to control her facial expressions. Yes, everything is constantly changing. Eris nodded as she gazed randomly into the distance. Gilgamesh jumped to his feet and said, "By the way, your birthday is approaching, so you can ask me for any kind of gift you want, I'll get you whatever you ask for." Eris didn't hesitate and replied, "Then I want a dragon. A lizard with wings." Gilgamesh thought for a moment and, out of curiosity, asked, "What's so good about dragons?" "I could believe in a spirit that protects you, that ritual was in the book we took from those guys at the auction house." Eris blushed when she realized that Gilgamesh was taking her words seriously, so she quickly said, "I don't want a dragon, whatever you give me, I'm sure I'll like it. Perhaps after studying those summoning rituals for familiars and creating spirit servants, I can try a few times to see what comes out. Anyway, I'll give you a beautiful gift, Eris," Gilgamesh said as he reached out his hand towards her and added, "But you have etiquette classes, even if they aren't important, we should never be a mongrel." "What's a mongrel?" Eris asked, confused, as they approached the castle's entrance. "Well, that's something similar to the word commoners, but I used it before to naturally dictate something with a unique meaning. But not all commoners should be called by this name, only those who don't respect me." "Well, that word comes to mind after remembering something." Gilgamesh bid farewell to Eris and remained lost in thought about his past. In the end, he too had been a mongrel for having died as a human. "Although my love for humanity now doesn't allow me to use this word regularly." "Ghislaine, where are you going?" Gilgamesh noticed a carriage with Eris's teacher traveling alone. "I'm looking for a potential master for Eris in magic." Ghislaine mentioned this briefly, thinking it wasn't of interest to Gilgamesh. "Is it far?" Gilgamesh had nothing else to do, so he asked instead. Chapter 77, The Direction. "It's a bit of a distance, it would take several hours to go back and forth by carriage, do you really want to come?" Ghislaine, although she understood Gilgamesh, had few interactions with him, so with her limited social skills, she couldn't say much. Ghislaine didn't exactly see Gilgamesh as a child, but the more she understood him, the more mysterious he became. She was aware that after all the rumors about Gilgamesh and many of the things that were true about him, many had a mistaken idea of the true behavior of the Red Prince. Ghislaine's subconscious mind constantly scolded her for thinking she was talking to a child because she felt that Gilgamesh's wisdom was much deeper than that of most adults she had met. That's because Gilgamesh is not exactly a child. Every prince and princess of any kingdom must be smart enough not to die in the struggle for the throne. Not just as they grow up, but from childhood. If you're not careful, you'll end up dead. Then I'll take you to that place. Traveling by carriage is neither comfortable nor fast." Gilgamesh snapped his fingers, and a huge golden ripple appeared beside him, revealing his arc for faster travel than he had in his position. This throne of Gilgamesh is a golden arc with an emerald color, one of his numerous high-tech noble phantasms from Hindu mythology that he had used before. This arc is powered by a solar crystal, rutilated quartz crystals, which burn mercury as fuel. It defies the laws of physics, traveling at the speed of thought, and can easily surpass speeds that no other aircraft or person can achieve. It has a pilot's throne that can be removed in emergency situations, and a control column, not used due to interference with the operation of the Gate of Babylon, which is placed directly in front. "Well, we'll arrive in a few minutes, so you wouldn't mind standing, right? It's not that I'm selfish, it's just that I need to control this thing." Gilgamesh climbed onto his golden arc. "What kind of thing is this?" Ghislaine got a little excited discovering this magical platform with qualities similar to the Dragon King's floating castle. "This is an arc we'll be using, its name is Vimana. Get on, and you'll see that we'll get to that place in no time." Gilgamesh started manipulating his Vimana while sitting on the throne, and a golden glow began to expand around it. "Well, it seems much more fun than traveling in a carriage." Ghislaine climbed onto the Vimana and walked up the steps to reach the side of the throne where Gilgamesh was sitting, so when she was ready, the Vimana floated higher and higher off the ground, even through the snow, and began to move at high speed. By the way, what kind of instructor are they looking for, Eris? Gilgamesh became somewhat interested. For Ghislaine to personally seek one, it had to be someone significant. It's just a favor that young Lord Philip is doing for his cousin. It turns out this got delayed due to certain political issues that you resolved when you showed up. If it weren't for that, perhaps that teacher, who is actually a child, would have arrived at the Grere mansion a year and a half ago. Ghislaine explained to Gilgamesh casually. When Gilgamesh heard the word child, his curiosity was piqued, and the Vimana's speed increased. There was no issue with breathing difficulties because a shield prevented air from becoming a problem. By the way, in which direction should I exactly head? After a few minutes, Gilgamesh slowed down and his gaze settled on Ghislaine, who was seated beside the throne. I didn't tell you, did I? Ghislaine's face darkened due to her forgetfulness. She had been so impressed with the sensation of flying in the air that she had completely forgotten their destination. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, concealed his embarrassment as he had forgotten to ask because he was enjoying the opportunity to show off his Vimana to Ghislaine, who had many similarities to giant cats. After some complications, Gilgamesh understood the exact direction they needed to go, using his ability to see the past and determine their destination. If it weren't for the Vimana's speed, the journey would have taken just as long as traveling by carriage. Boom! The Vimana's speed increased as it advanced through the beautiful green landscape, free from any human marks. These remote areas of the kingdom were the best, not only offering a connection to nature but also endless tranquility. However, very few could afford to live here. Not only was there a high presence of wild beasts, but they were also incredibly strong. Without being a knight, it would be challenging to live in these areas. Of course, while it might be appealing for Gilgamesh to live here, he preferred to reside in a beautiful castle built to his own specifications. As they emerged from the clouds, a stunning landscape slowly appeared, a sight that very few would have the opportunity to appreciate in their lifetime. According to Ghislaine, the chances of flying were few, if not non-existent, in this kingdom. Although there were platforms that flew in this realm, they were so difficult to find and access that it would be better to dismiss the idea. These beautiful vistas left Gilgamesh amazed. It was so different from Uruk that he could easily say they were two distinct worlds. The rich land and the beautiful breeze were something that very few places could achieve, which is why living differently but similarly was a deep-seated desire within him. It seems we've arrived. Should that be the estate down there? Gilgamesh asked casually, looking at the village from an altitude of over 1,000 meters and moving at a speed difficult for the human eye to detect. Yes, it should be this place. Ghislaine responded with more calmness as she used her eye's ability to see clearly at the distance they were. When Gilgamesh arrived, he didn't descend immediately but instead concealed his presence and waited alongside Ghislaine, as they observed a child facing an adult in what appeared to be a sword duel. Chapter 78, Preparations. That child should be 7 or 8 years old, right? Gilgamesh asked as he watched the combat from above with some surprise. To consider this child as an instructor was a poorly executed joke in Gilgamesh's eyes. They were talking about magic, which refers to the manipulation of mana stored in the body to produce supernatural effects known as magic spells. Generally, it is believed that a person's mana or magical power reserve is inherited, and the amount one has is determined at birth. However, now that Gilgamesh could sense the magical quantity inside that child, he discovered that there were certain exceptions, in addition to the children he was personally training. All people are capable of increasing their total mana amount by stimulating their mana from an early age. Those slaves he had been buying and sending to orphanages to be taught magic were incredible talents who were slowly accumulating worthy power. The ability to learn how to cast silent spells is also related to practicing the skill at an early age. Of course, this did not apply to Gilgamesh, who had not touched magic since he arrived in this world. He knew that his body contained an enormous amount of magic, which compared to the child beneath him, would be like comparing an ocean to a drop of seawater. There was no comparison in their hidden power. It was true that magic did not seem attractive to him in any way at the moment, not when there were so many other things that caught his attention. Ghislaine looked at the battle unfolding between father and son and said, "He must have just turned 8, I'm not well informed about it as it's not relevant. But certainly, that child has talent, incredible magic talent." Gilgamesh furrowed his brow and thought that unless it was a reincarnation, an incarnation, or an enlightened being, there was no possibility that this child had such achievements in magic. So, after seeing that the battle had ended, he said, "Now that they've finished, let's descend." Ghislaine nodded. Bana village. Home to Paul Grere. That was too close. Paul observed his unconscious son lying on the ground and then his dirty shoes. He had received the response letter a year and a half after receiving one stating that things were not good for the family at that time. He thought they had politely ignored him, but after a year and a half, a response had come. Paul, as a father who found it difficult to understand his son, wanted to leave a strong impression on him by giving him a beating while teaching him how to use a sword. But after another year and a half, his son was incredible at magic, which surprised him greatly when he used it in the battle. "As expected of my son, his intuition for combat is astounding," Paul said. One of the things he was most proud of was having such a talented son. As expected from a genius who even made a water saint mage lose confidence. His son was terrifying, but he would always be proud of him. In the past, Paul could only feel envy towards those who were better than him, but surprisingly, when it came to his son, he didn't feel any negative emotions. Rudy. Sylphie, who appeared on the scene, tried to rescue her friend and immediately cast an intermediate-level spell. Despite being the same age as Rudius, she was incredibly skilled in using magic. "The battle has already ended, you should consider creating a fictional scene in your mind and take a closer look at things instead." Gilgamesh appeared behind Sylphie and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Who is this?" Sylphie asked in surprise as she turned around, but because she was casting a spell, it ended up hitting Ghislaine in the face. Paul, who was watching his son's friend, froze when he saw a boy much taller than Rudius suddenly appear behind Sylphie. He was about to question who he was when he suddenly saw Ghislaine appearing abruptly by his side. Gilgamesh smiled at the little elf beside him, who looked at him in surprise, and said, "We arrived unexpectedly, it would be abnormal if they didn't see us." Sylphie remained frozen, not knowing what to say. She looked at Gilgamesh, who was very tall and walking towards Rudius without any apparent intention. "Hey, is this your son?" Gilgamesh asked, looking at the man standing to the side, holding a wooden sword. "Oh, of course he's my son," Paul said boastfully, as if he regarded his son above all other children. But Gilgamesh smiled coldly and asked again, "Are you sure he's your son?" This question annoyed Paul a little. He looked at Gilgamesh more sternly and said, "I was there when he was born, do I need to tell you that he's not my son?" Choose your words carefully, Paul, you would lose more than just your rank if you're not careful. Ghislaine walked towards the unconscious Rudius and looked at Paul, who handed her a letter and asked, "Who's that annoying kid?" "Someone you should be cautious of. You're a good man but certainly foolish, although it's common in foolish nobles like you who have abandoned their status." Gilgamesh stopped looking at Paul and instead looked at Sylphie. "Girl, it would be a shame for someone with your talent to stay in this village waiting for your little boyfriend's favor. Don't you want to become stronger?" Sylphie didn't know how to respond to that question. Gilgamesh smiled as he looked at Sylphie. "In a few weeks, a mage from the Tower of Uruk will come to this village to offer you and your parents the opportunity to move to ours. Of course, you must be trained to become part of my magical workforce. Your parents would be with you. What do you say to that?" Paul frowned at this scene and asked, "Who says that?" "The future king of the Azura kingdom, someone who will clean up all the garbage in this kingdom." Gilgamesh left these words and disappeared from everyone's sight. Without waiting for a response, when Ghislaine was ready, Gilgamesh left this place at an impressive speed. In just a few seconds, he had left the village that had brought him certain surprises. Who would have thought that this boy is a mongrel in every sense? Gilgamesh smiled coldly as the speed continued to increase to the point where the landscapes couldn't be seen. Chapter 79, A Woman's Character. He had seen fragments of Rudius's life, and he certainly wasn't a normal child. Normally, when a child is born, they learn what it means to live years after being in the world. As for the child named Rudius, who lay unconscious beside him, he seemed to possess awareness and superior intelligence, something anyone would have noticed except for his parents, who appeared to be oblivious to the fact that their newborn son was a hidden monster. When he looked deeper into his life, there was no need to know that he was a reincarnated individual. Something incredibly interesting, since it made Gilgamesh understand that all kinds of people could appear in this world. This led him to wonder if his friend somehow ended up in this world. No, there was no chance that had happened. Most likely, people who awaken in this world are few, and Gilgamesh didn't reincarnate, he incarnated into the body of a prince, which made his situation very different from Rudius's. While pondering all this, they had returned to the Grere castle and slowly descended to land on the ground. Ghislaine noticed that Gilgamesh seemed different, so she decided not to interrupt his thoughts. After arriving home, she descended with Rudius in her arms while also carrying the luggage that the boy had brought with him. "Is there something bothering you?" Ghislaine looked at Gilgamesh and finally asked. She knew that anything bothering the boy in front of her could lead to chaos, so she wanted to know if there was anything she could do to prevent it. "It's nothing important. I'll be out for a few hours, and if anyone asks for me, tell them I'll be back later." Without saying anything more, Gilgamesh left without further explanation. As he moved through the city, a shadow appeared over his vimana and respectfully unrolled in front of him. "Sir, are there new orders?" The withered old man asked this question while keeping his eyes closed. Gilgamesh looked at him for a moment and said, "I want you to keep an eye on that boy named Rudius. He arrived today and will be Eris's magic instructor. His existence is indifferent to me, but he might act suspiciously and, worse yet, be a bothersome enemy I need to be cautious of. I'd like to place a shadow over him to keep him under surveillance." The withered old man understood perfectly what Gilgamesh meant and asked, "My lord, what should we do if he acts suspiciously?" "If he doesn't harm anyone important to me, do not act. But if he lays a hand on my belongings, then you may kill him." Gilgamesh looked ahead and said, "Also, I want you to send an emperor-class mage to Aldeabana with strong guards. I have a bad feeling." "What shall we do in that village, my lord?" "Ah, I'm sorry, what you should do is find an elven mage named Sylphie. She's talented, so I want to take her to Elaine for training to become someone strong." Gilgamesh maintained his interest in her, as she could be valuable in keeping Rudius calm, so he pointed out, "However, if she refuses to accept my kindness, pay no more attention to her." "Orders accepted, my lord," said the withered old man, bowing, and then he disappeared without a trace. "It smells like gods," Gilgamesh muttered before disappearing from the scene. "Eris, your magic teacher will arrive in the afternoon, so you must be ready," said Hilda as she stroked her beautiful daughter's scarlet hair. "Is it necessary for me to learn magic, Mom?" Eris was a bit annoyed but didn't express it too much on her face. Hilda had noticed that her daughter's behavior had changed since Prince Gilgamesh arrived. She had undergone a radical change in her attitude and seemed much more refined in her demeanor. This made Hilda understand that by being close to a great young man, her daughter was also taking great strides in her grumpy behavior. "You've changed a lot, Eris. Are you happy with this marriage, dear?" Hilda asked this question while looking at Eris's expression in the mirror. "What are you saying, Mom?" Eris blushed a bit and said, "I don't care." Hilda smiled and advised her daughter, "Gilgamesh is a very intelligent, understanding prince, and there's no doubt he'll be a king of this realm. However, you must have a character in front of him, you must not become expressive and predictable. He may have more wives, but he chose you first, so you must show what you're worth. Eris stopped thinking about things related to Gilgamesh and listened attentively to her mother's words. Hilda knew perfectly well what nobility was like and understood to some extent what awaited her daughter. He chose you, and he indicated that the marriage would depend on your wishes, giving us to understand that he would sincerely accept your opinion even if you decide to refuse in the end. Your father said that as long as the engagement is announced, it will be more than enough. He will support you in whatever you decide to do. Hilda missed her other two children, whom she had not been able to meet due to family policies and rules, but she had Eris, so she would always seek the best option for her. I'm okay with that, Mom. I don't dislike it. Eris wanted to keep talking, but her mother interrupted her. Listen, Eris, not all nobles are normal, and even we aren't, but there are many who are the worst. I've taught you the aspects of nobility and what will happen when you get married, so I just want you to know that you must be much stronger. Gilgamesh is a good candidate for you, but he's different from any other young man. He's not interested in the body, the face, or physical attraction. What he's looking for is a woman who matches him. I'm sure if that wasn't in you, he wouldn't have stayed here, so you must take advantage of that. Hilda didn't tell her about the political issues behind her engagement, it wasn't relevant to her. What she needed to do was teach her daughter to assert herself in front of Gilgamesh, making her understand that she was far superior to any other candidate for her engagement. Only then would Eris become the queen of the Azura kingdom, and her own daughter would be an enviable woman among millions in the realm. Don't worry, Mother, I will marry Gilgamesh and make myself worthy in his eyes, said Eris with a serious look in response to her mother's teachings. Well said, my daughter. Remember, I'll always be by your side with any kind of advice. Hilda smiled as she stroked her little daughter's hair. Chapter 80, A Boy. When Rudius woke up, he felt like he was in a bed, but due to the difference from his usual room, this bed was completely different. Where am I? Rudius sat up in his bed and saw a huge woman sitting in front of him. When he realized what was happening, he immediately introduced himself. Nice to meet you, my name is Rudius Grere. I apologize for not being able to greet you properly, I'm still a bit confused. You're quite polite for someone like Paul's son. I suppose I inherited that from my mother. I'm Ghislaine. I hope we get along from now on. Yes. Rudius was quite confused. The only thing he remembered was practicing with his father, and now he seemed to be in a completely different place. Judging by the position of the sun, not more than 2 hours had passed since then, but somehow, he wasn't at home. Excuse me. You can call me Ghislaine. Ghislaine, did my father leave you a message? Ghislaine took a letter from her bosom, and before handing it to Rudius, she said, but before you read the letter aloud, you must understand something that has been happening in this place over the past few months. The mansion is not entirely peaceful. All of this is because Prince Gilgamesh of the Azura Kingdom is residing here, and although it hasn't been officially announced yet, he will be Eris Grere's fiancé. So, under no circumstances should you act normally in front of him. I see. Rudius, who still didn't understand anything, wanted to ask, but first, he listened to everything Ghislaine had to say. For some reason, I sense that Gilgamesh is interested in you, although I don't understand in what sense. You must be reserved. To stay in this place, it's not enough to be a teacher, you must also not disturb the prince and not give him any reason to dismiss you. Ghislaine was very clear on this point. I notice. Rudius looked at his hands and clenched them tightly, as if something he was aware of was affecting him in some way. Did you say something? Ghislaine asked as she looked at Rudius. It's nothing, I'm just a little nervous about being in the same place as a prince. At the same time, in the largest tower of the Grere mansion. The whole city will be destroyed. Soros Grere stared at the point in the sky attentively, and as he contemplated what he had heard from Prince Gilgamesh, who was next to him, he asked, is there any way to prevent this catastrophe? None. We could try to destroy it with powerful attacks, but that would likely result in the same outcome. Gilgamesh didn't understand the nature of that overwhelming amount of mana gathered in the sky, but he could somehow prevent it from completely harming the main city of Ctto. Now is not a good time to focus on that problem. Eris's birthday is in a year, and that's when the engagement will be announced. It's the only opportunity we would have for a more significant impact. What do you think about that? Soros had a point, and Gilgamesh agreed with it as well. Maybe we can't control its nature, but we can control who it will affect when it erupts. According to my calculations, it will be at least 2 to 3 years before it erupts and causes the mana catastrophe, so we have enough time to prepare and develop a plan that involves the people of this city. Gilgamesh pondered it seriously and said, even if we can't prevent collateral damage, we can reduce the number of deaths by millions if we prepare from now on. If I can't stop it when it erupts, we must have a plan B that involves the complete reconstruction of Ctto's most important city, but it will have my full support in addressing this problem. Soros rubbed his head and said, according to records of small-scale disasters, something like affecting an entire city has never happened before. But it's nothing we should worry about. We'll use this catastrophe to our advantage to gain the people's solidarity. Gilgamesh smiled broadly at the idea. Prince Gilgamesh, what are you thinking? Soros sensed something but decided not to overthink and chose to ask instead. Although we could possibly save everyone from the mana catastrophe with effort, it would be best to show the people the true nature of the Asura royal family. What do you think the crown's stance will be on this mana disaster, where we may need to save hundreds of thousands of lives? Gilgamesh asked, awaiting the old man's response. They will obviously refuse. Even if the city of Roa is destroyed, they will do nothing to rebuild it and leave it as a lost place. Soros reluctantly accepted this reality as it was likely to turn out. What if Prince Gilgamesh decides to support all those families in need? Not only have those missing people become slaves, but many of them are likely to become commodities for other kingdoms. From this action, we will gain 3 things: the support of the people, the gratitude of millions of devastated individuals, and we will see the stance of those kingdoms that supposedly only seek peace. Gilgamesh turned around and said, if we win over the people, my reign will have a power that no other kingdom will have. If we have an unsatisfied populace with the crown, they will be the backbone of my reign. And if any kingdom refuses to cooperate in saving my people, then when I become king, I will destroy their royalty and rule as their emperor. My people are opening Uruk towers in different kingdoms, controlling slavery, as it will be a point where most of the teleport will be gathered. That's why the decisions of the royalty of those kingdoms will be indifferent to me. I'm only seeking to assess their character and empathy. Although many will die, this will mark a new beginning for all humans within the Asura kingdom. You're terribly perceptive, Prince Gilgamesh. I will support you in this plan with everything you need. Soros smiled in a way he had never done before. There was horror, happiness, fear, ecstasy, and desire all combined in a single facial expression. What he had heard made no sense. It was as if Prince Gilgamesh were a god. He was certainly a child, but the ease with which he had formulated such a plan was something only a monarch who had already reigned for years could do. If that's the case, Gilgamesh was born to rule over all others. Chapter 81, The Magic Master. After being informed about all the events that had unfolded due to his own requests, Rudius was guided by Ghislaine to the guest room where he would await a meeting with Eris' father, the lord of the place. After a few minutes, footsteps could be heard from afar, and the door was opened by a young man who immediately said, "I'm late, I was in a very important meeting, so I couldn't come earlier." The slender figure of the man came into view of Rudius, and Thomas, who was sitting to the side, stood up and said, "You arrived at a good time, my lord. Just now, young Rudius has arrived. Pleased to meet you, my name is Rudius Grere." Rudius nodded slightly in an attempt to make a good impression. "Ah, and I am Philip Byrius Grere. I must say that when nobles greet each other, they place their right hand over their chest and slightly bow their heads. Judging by your initial greeting, if you were to encounter my father, he might reprimand you for it. Following Philip's instructions, Rudius attempted to mimic a noble greeting and asked, "Is this the correct way?" "That will do for now. However, I'd like to add that your initial greeting was rather informal. If a blacksmith were to greet my father in that manner, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. Please, have a seat." Philip gestured towards a chair as he settled onto a couch and inquired directly, "So, what exactly do you know about the situation?" "My father informed me that if I gave lessons to Miss Eris for 3 years, we would be financially supported to enter Magua University, both me and another person." Rudius explained what he knew about the arrangement. "Is that all?" "That's correct." "I see." Philip rested his chin on his folded hands as he contemplated something of great importance. After a while, he asked, "Do you like women?" "I don't quite reach my father's level." Rudius responded promptly and naturally. "Is that so? Well, that's good to know. You should be aware that aside from you, we have a very special guest here who should not be bothered under any circumstances. He is my daughter's betrothed, whom you will be teaching. So, I would ask that you keep that in mind during your stay here. Do you understand?" "Of course, I'll only focus on teaching her." Rudius replied, thinking that if Eris ended up interested in him, it would be a natural outcome of things. But at that moment, Philip issued one final warning, "I'm glad to hear it. I don't say this to imply you have any improper thoughts about my daughter or yourself. I say it so you're aware of the consequences. I won't be able to protect you if you make a mistake, so as long as you understand that, you're hired." Rudius' thoughts shifted to Gilgamesh, considering that this prince was certainly special as a very arrogant man who believed he had no equal, something very likely typical among nobles. "Currently, my little daughter has changed a lot since the prince came to our home, so she has become more tolerant of people and accepts teachings from teachers who assist her in various disciplines she must undertake. Therefore, you will only be responsible for teaching her magic." Rudius, who was still thinking about Philip's earlier words, asked, "Is there any problem with me being young in her teaching?" "Not at all. It's just that the rumors you'll likely hear after living here might be a bit unsettling. But you should know that each of them is true. So, as long as you know your job and treat Prince Gilgamesh with respect, he won't interfere with or bother you in any way." Philip shrugged indifferently. "Now I understand it well." Rudius nodded in understanding. "To be honest, if you had come earlier, I wouldn't have had any hope that you could manage it. But now I believe you can do it. I'd like you to give it a try." Philip was very sincere on this point. "I hope I can be once I get to know her," Rudius remarked with a hint of distrust in his words. "If he doesn't get this job, he'll have to look for another way to get into that magic school. Somehow, he needs to make a good impression on this girl named Eris." "Well, that would be all then. Nothing progresses with words alone, so I will introduce you to my daughter. Thomas, tell Eris to come and see me." Philip got up from the couch. When Eris arrived and saw Rudius, her gaze turned to her father as if asking if this was some kind of joke. She didn't make a scene, she just stared at the boy who was smaller than her with a certain dismay. "Pleased to meet you, my name is Rudius Grere." Rudius used the posture Philip had taught him to greet Eris. Eris nodded and said disinterestedly, "My name is Eris. You're certainly smaller than me. Do you think you're capable of teaching me magic properly? It's one thing to be talented in a discipline, and another to have the talent to pass on that knowledge to others. You should know that, father. Personally, I believe I have the qualities to be your teacher. I won't know for sure, but it all depends on your willingness to learn magic." Rudius smiled awkwardly and responded with a hint of irritation. "What did you say? Do you think you're so good that if I don't learn, it's because I'm not interested and not because of your teaching abilities?" Eris furrowed her brow slightly but still said, Fine, if your teaching abilities aren't up to par, I won't study magic. My friend who's the same age as me is good at magic and understood my teachings. I'm sure you won't have any problems. Rudius tried to give Eris a small compliment, which, of course, didn't work. Who told you that magic is the only thing that exists? Even though it's certainly more powerful and grants you power more quickly, if you face a swordsman of the same level, I doubt magic is superior to swordsmanship. Besides, if I'm only studying magic, it's just because of my father's request, not my own preference. Eris glanced at Rudius and nodded before leaving the room. It went much better than expected. My daughter has changed, and I'm glad for that. Philip said as he left as well. Thomas on the side said, it looks like you're hired. Congratulations, young Rudius. Yes, it was easier than I expected. Rudius showed an expression that conveyed many of his thoughts. He was certainly happy to be hired and that it was easier than expected, but he would have preferred not to live near Gilgamesh, who had been reminded several times to be cautious around him. Chapter 82, What One Values Most. Rudius had heard it from his father, and according to the rumors that had spread throughout the kingdom, he heard that there was a child who rivaled his personal achievements. He was constantly reminded that there were even more impressive youths outside of his home. According to the rumors, Gilgamesh, who was fourth in line to inherit the throne, was a prince who enjoyed battles. Many perceived him this way, but others said that he only enjoyed killing those who crossed him, even going so far as to kill a sword king. Many believed that Prince Gilgamesh was the sword's child, a potential sword god who could rival even the strongest in the world. Given his young age and his status as a sword king, a title held only by Ghislaine with the king's sword style, Rudius knew he must be someone very powerful. However, who was Gilgamesh really? Perhaps he was like Rudius, a simple human who had reincarnated into this world with a much more privileged background. An evil person who seeks only the destruction of this world. Rudius said these words as he walked through a dark corridor. But as he was walking, he felt a presence right beside him that appeared out of nowhere in his view. Gilgamesh looked at this child and smiled. You must be Eris's magic tutor, right? Rudius looked at the young man with golden hair and eyes much more intense than Eris's, but those blood-red eyes were different from those of an innocent 9-year-old girl. Gilgamesh was different, but Rudius quickly regained his composure and said, I'm Rudius Grere, nice to meet you. I'm Gilgamesh. I just wanted to greet you since you are much stronger than a child your age should be. Gilgamesh extended his hand to help Rudius get up. Haha, I've been learning magic since I was young. Rudius said as he accepted Gilgamesh's hand and smiled casually. Gilgamesh nodded and said, you must have heard some things about me, but I want to assure you that you don't need to worry. There are many things I must concern myself with, so you won't see me very often. I can say the same. I'll only be teaching Eris magic for 3 years and then I'll leave this place. You don't need to worry that I'll do anything strange to your fiancé, I'll just do my job. Rudius tried to make things clear, but the aura emanating from Gilgamesh prevented him from speaking properly. There must be a misunderstanding about the idea you have in your head. Gilgamesh let go of Rudius's hand and approached a bit closer. I don't mind or feel uncomfortable with someone like you around Eris. I know perfectly well what I'm worth, and if my fiancé ends up getting involved with someone else, it would be a shame, but that's how things go, right? I don't decide for Eris, she makes her own choices, and I accept that she has friends since she's just a child. But if anyone else comes with foolish ideas in their head, I'll make sure to rip that out of their soul. You can have any kind of thoughts, but when your actions are about to betray those thoughts, remember that you have 2 lovely sisters. Surprisingly, your father has 2 beautiful wives, and on top of that, a charming semi-elf friend. Rudius's eyes widened in shock as he looked at Gilgamesh, who was very close to him. The words he wanted to say wouldn't come out of his throat, as if a huge hand was choking his vocal cords. Think carefully about your future, work honestly, and there won't be any problems. But be very careful with that depraved mind if you ever try something with Eris, who is just a child, because I won't just take your hands but also everything you love in this world." Gilgamesh walked away with a harmonious look and said, "But of course, you're just a magic tutor. I met your father when I accompanied Ghislaine to find Eris's tutor, and I was quite surprised that it was just a child. Do you know? To learn a magical spell, it takes a lot of reading comprehension, wisdom, and understanding. You researched a bit, and you achieved it at just 6 years old, an accomplishment that would even make the princes of this kingdom envious. Of course, that doesn't include me. If you need anything, you can come to me." Gilgamesh waved his hand and said, "See you later." When Gilgamesh disappeared from the corridor, Rudius took a deep breath and sat down on the floor. His breath had momentarily stopped, causing him to lose track of what he was doing. "Who is he?" Rudius asked as he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. From what he could witness, this wasn't an ordinary human reincarnated, and he wasn't someone who could be considered a child. If he could put it into words, Gilgamesh would be a cruel monarch hidden within a child's body. He didn't want to get into trouble with someone like him, so it was best not to get too involved in potential problems that could inconvenience his already good life. The last thing he wanted was to provoke a prince. He didn't want the kind of fear and oppression he had experienced in his past life. So, once he finished his job here, he would withdraw as far as possible from this household. "Yes, that's what I'll do," Rudius muttered as he walked to his room, unaware that someone was following him in the darkness. Chapter 83, Rudius's Senses. Who? Rudius collapsed onto the ground, clutching his chest as it continued to beat rapidly. He had completely misunderstood everyone's intentions when they warned him about Prince Gilgamesh's behavior. He wasn't a self-conscious young man who cried over things he thought were his. Unlike other nobles with a unique character, Gilgamesh didn't seem to be anything like them. The prince's qualities were on a completely different level, something he still couldn't comprehend. Gilgamesh was something entirely different from anything he knew. He was a true noble who strongly represented his title. And to think someone like me thought Gilgamesh would be a jealous child just because his fiancée's tutor is a few years younger than him. I'm losing my way and my mind. The fear he felt when hearing those words from Prince Gilgamesh still lingered in his mind, something he didn't think possible for a child. He must be like me, there's no doubt. I'll have to ask that person about it another time. The next day, Rudius attended Eris's first class and expected to see Gilgamesh there, but he was nowhere to be found. After inquiring about it from Eris, she simply mentioned that he occasionally went out on business and didn't return for days. "So, I will teach you the fundamentals of magic." "That's right." Rudius, who watched the days go by, remembered each and every one of his experiences. "Fireball." Rudius applauded and said, "That's incredible. If you didn't pursue the sword, I'm sure you'd be a great mage." "That's the best I can say, but even I know that intermediate rank is the highest you can achieve, Eris." As a magic tutor for a 9-year-old girl, my life in the castle changed completely. I had grown accustomed to living in the solitude of my room, learning and devising new magic, focusing on my private studies, and avoiding interaction with others, not even considering Sylphie within this. However, Eris, the girl I was supposed to teach, was the complete opposite. She was much friendlier and more confident than I was at her age, and her reserved way of speaking intrigued me. From the first day, I noticed that Eris had a natural talent for fire magic. Though her skills were raw, her potential was undeniable. It didn't take long before I began teaching her the basics of magic, and she absorbed every lesson with enthusiasm. It was clear she wanted to learn and better herself, often mentioning that she wanted to impress Gilgamesh with her spells. Despite our personality differences, we began to forge a bond. Often, after our lessons, we would sit together in the castle garden, gazing at the stars and sharing stories from our lives. Eris didn't talk much about her family, but there was something in her gaze that shone with a certain sadness as she noticed Gilgamesh's frequent absences. After he threatened to harm my family, I sent an urgent letter home, but the response in the following days was quite simple: they were fine, and nothing had changed since his absence. They did mention Prince Gilgamesh, who had shown an interest in Sylphie and her talent for magic, but beyond that, nothing seemed to catch the attention of her family, or at least that's how her idiotic father appeared to perceive it. At times over the past few days, I tried to learn more about sword techniques. Ghislaine was very helpful in the practice, but as I knew, I wasn't talented at wielding a sword, and beyond one of the simple ranks, I knew I would never excel. My attempts to seek out Prince Gilgamesh were never granted. I never saw him up close again, so I knew the chances of doing so in the future were slim. Initially, I had admired his bravery. A boy just over 10 years old was truly an incredible being for his age, so as time passed here, I wanted to somehow find out if his suspicions were true. I believed it that way until I received another visit from that strange being. Uruk Tower. Did Gilgamesh sense apostles heading towards the village where that half-elf girl is? Elaine thought carefully, and after realizing that what Gilgamesh was referring to was about to begin, she said, "Select a strong squad, send a sword emperor as the captain." "Yes, my lady." Elaine looked at the documents in her hand and murmured, "It seems that this is now a battle of who has better future-seeing abilities. Somehow, I sense that Gilgamesh's enemy wants to eliminate future allies or wives. It's not a bad idea, but manipulating the future in such a way is truly horrible. I hope this doesn't escalate further." A few hours later, a man with a face hardened by his vast experiences bowed before Elaine and said in a serious tone, "I'm proud to know that you require my expertise. I'll be more than willing to fulfill your wishes. It's not that serious, Sir Kalen. That girl in the village of Ban isn't special beyond her talent for magic and great spell-casting abilities, not to mention her, but what's most important is that some people with ill intentions could harm those folks, and Gilgamesh's wish is for you to prevent all of that in the best way possible." Kalen nodded and said, "My lord's wishes are orders, I will fulfill his demands to the letter. I'll depart as soon as possible. I'll have to travel by magical ship to arrive in less than a day. In that case, I'll sign the necessary documents so you have no concerns on the way." Elaine nodded as she walked towards her office. Kalen, who followed her, saw a young girl. To be honest, she looked like a child, but those enormous daggers on her waist gave her a completely different appearance. "Is she your personal guard?" Elaine shook her head and said, "Not at all, but she enjoys talking to me when no one else is around, and I often teach her many things. Her name is Anna. She was rescued by Gilgamesh from the hands of an old pig. She's dangerous," was the only thing Kalen thought when he saw Anna, looking at him and smiling faintly. Gilgamesh often buys slaves of all kinds. Warriors are the best purchases, but many of them decide to try to return to their homes. An example would be the beast girls who are returned to their forest, all with the sole intention of establishing good relations with large tribes and hidden villages. Slavery is something that no one cares about, they see it as natural. But Kalen detests that about society as a whole, so when he learned that an organization was buying up all the slaves in Ars, he secretly investigated them. But in just one night, he was caught, explained his motives, and to his surprise, Elaine personally told him the intention of the one behind all of this. He never believed it was true, but when he visited those orphanages, he felt deeply moved. From that day on, he swore loyalty to Prince Gilgamesh, received immense power, and wholeheartedly committed himself to follow him to the death if necessary. If Prince Gilgamesh ever becomes king, it would be fantastic for the future of the Azura Kingdom. Chapter 84, An Incident. In the following days, everything seemed very calm. While Eris studied and learned magic from her peculiar teacher, Gilgamesh devised a plan with Soros and Philip to address the looming issue in the shadows of this region. According to what Gilgamesh had seen, the explosion would cover a significant part of the Ctto region, but there was an exception if people were stationed at a specific location during the explosion. The next problem was not how to transport the city's inhabitants to that point, but how to convince them that this was due to a sudden explosion unimaginable in their lives. But that seemingly minor problem would be addressed last. For now, the focus was on establishing the location where everyone should seek refuge when the explosion began. On the map, a unique place was chosen to build a magical fortress that would be connected to a floating platform that Gilgamesh would summon from his Gate of Babylon. So, what needed to be done was to find a peaceful place with the capacity for more than 1 million people, all of whom could enter in an orderly manner with a predetermined program. For this, the newly graduated knights would be responsible for guarding the location, and the workers would handle the construction. However, even with this plan in place, achieving the construction, which would likely take more than a year to complete, was time-limited. The workforce would take time to arrive, and progress would be slow. Therefore, Gilgamesh would send mages to expedite the construction, helping with whatever was needed. Once that place was established, Gilgamesh would inaugurate the area with large magical ships considered enormous arks capable of transporting more than 20,000 people. These magical ships operated with mana stones, which Gilgamesh had in abundance in his inventory, so he could make use of these magical devices that appeared somewhat irregularly in this world. Having presented all these proposals, Gilgamesh, along with the 2 lords of this region, knew what lay behind them and what they expected to gain after the explosion occurred. It was not just a matter of politics but also a change, and when Gilgamesh's forces would move to eliminate the Grere family. Once the main family of the city of Ars was left without lords, Philip would rule the family as the new lord and establish absolute control with the help of the expanding Uruk towers. The money, resources, and labor needed in this place barely satisfied Gilgamesh, but he was confident that within about 5 years, a capital 20 times larger, stronger, and brighter would be established here. As for the Ars region, that would be left to the Grere family. At this moment, Gilgamesh's fortune, with all these innovative ideas being implemented by Elaine, had reached unimaginable amounts for any other noble. As a result, he was swiftly and effectively taking control of the slaves in all regions of the Azura kingdom. Furthermore, his pigeons, the organization led by knights who had abandoned their titles and men hired through special methods, quietly took control of these organizations without many even realizing it. In this way, Gilgamesh's power had extended to all regions, ready to conduct a large-scale cleansing within the Azura kingdom. Whenever he wished, he could ascend to the throne or create chaos. My lord, as ordered, an emperor-class mage and a squadron of 20 knights are heading towards the village of Bana. The withered old man entered Gilgamesh's room and informed him of all this. That's quite excessive, but it's fine. Is there anything new to report about Eris's new tutor? Gilgamesh asked in a calm tone. That boy exhibits certain behaviors when no one is looking that don't correspond to his age, but beyond that, he hasn't done anything out of the ordinary. He teaches Miss Eris, and from time to time, they spend time training with the sword, although his results in this regard are quite poor. That's enough. You should return to the Purple Horse family and spend time with your own family, they must miss you greatly. Tell Alastair to take your place as an instructor and take a few months to rest, there won't be much activity during that time. Gilgamesh dismissed the withered old man. Thank you very much for your consideration, my lord. Oh, by the way, one more thing. Having been left alone in the room, Gilgamesh knew that in the coming years, he only had to take good care of his kingdom and eventually find that human god. As long as his body grew to that of an adult, he would be able to make full use of his armor, and there would be no one who could stop him. They should arrive before nightfall. Well, it would be interesting to see how that girl, the elf, will respond. Gilgamesh smiled as he walked to sleep under a tree, much like his friend Inkija would have done in his leisure time. 10 kilometers from the village of Ban. Can you tell me who this girl is that our lord is so interested in? A knight with the title of Sword King walked as he gazed out at the landscape from the magical ship flying at a speed 5 times faster than a conventional carriage. Now, is it our job to question our Lord's orders by doubting each of his decisions? Asked the captain of the knights, who was a sword emperor recently promoted after months of training in a special chamber. Captain Falcon, you know perfectly well what my question means. I'm just a curious man, replied the same knight as he stroked his beautiful black armor. Captain Falcon looked at this young man named Eric and responded calmly, she's a girl no older than 10 who possesses a terrifying amount of magic. We don't usually recruit children at such a young age, but our Lord decided to do so due to circumstances I am unaware of. However, knowing the reasons behind the prince's choices, it must be someone who will be useful to him in the future. You're very composed, Falcon. If it's a very strong girl, then our Lord Gilgamesh must be looking to ignite the desire to learn in the young magicians in ours. Although there are hundreds of young magicians, their abilities to learn and understand the limits of their strength are limited. If a girl her age enters the Mage Tower, those children will feel the need to study and reach new levels. Eric nodded and said, the powerful mage Kalen is truly wise. Of course, it's about fostering competitive spirit. If they have someone stronger as a competitor, those children will strive twice as hard to match those levels. Kalen, the mage sent on this mission, smiled strangely. After all, his magical reserves had increased due to that strange potion he had been given in the Tower of Uruk. Get ready, I'll be going down alone, but you should be vigilant in case there's any kind of anomaly, Kalen said as he stood up. Eric joked, his eyes directed towards his captain, we are 9 sword kings, 1 sword emperor, and another mage. Who in this kingdom could pose a threat? Anomalies tend to happen. Kalen was an experienced warrior, so the last thing he wanted was to fail his lord. Chapter 85, Who are you? Kalen walked slowly, his calculating gaze exuding a presence so trustworthy that anyone who interacted with him would think he was a great man. His age barely reached 45 years, which is normal when considering his power. Upon appearing in Ban village, he walked directly to the house of the girl he had come to recruit, and long before entering, he could see a blonde-haired man who was an elf. The elf had noticed him earlier and approached first. Good afternoon, are you looking for someone? You must be Sylphiette's father. If you'll permit me, I would like to have a very important conversation, both for you and for the future of your daughter. Kalen said, placing his hand over his chest. By the way, my name is Kalen, and I am a mage from the Ars Mage Tower. I'm Laz, Sylphie's father. Laz shook hands with the mage who seemed to come from a powerful background. After Sylphie's friend left, she seemed very sad, and she was hiding something that had happened before Paul's son left. Now that this mage had introduced himself, Laz knew it was about that. May I have a closer conversation with you and your wife? Kalen looked at the man in front of him and was as polite as possible. Of course, you may come in. Laz had no reason to refuse, but he certainly had his doubts that he wanted to clarify in this conversation. Darling, we have a visitor. I'm coming. A woman's voice could be heard from the back of this small house. Kalen smiled as he waited, sitting on a sofa, observing the living conditions of this family. At least they seemed humble, something every man living in the rural areas of the kingdom aspires to be. He couldn't deny that this kind of life was one he once dreamed of himself, but certainly now that dream had been overshadowed by a greater one since he met Gilgamesh. Who is he, Laz? A human woman walked over and took a seat beside her husband. Laz reassured his wife and said, he's a mage, dear. His name is Kalen, and he says he wants to talk about something involving Sylphie. Oh. Sylphie's mother nodded and regarded the mage in front of her with some vigilance. You don't have to worry. My lord happened to see your daughter and discovered that she has great potential for magic. You, as experienced parents, must know that there is something that stands out above all jobs, and that is magic. Something similar to it is swordsmanship, but certainly this group is more common. Kalen extended his hand and said, I come with no ill intentions. I am one of the representatives of the Mage Tower of the Azura Kingdom, and currently, I reside in Ars, the capital of the kingdom. My intention is to take your daughter so she can access the true mysteries of magic, be endowed with various knowledge, and her life undergo a significant change. Of course, you can accompany her at all times. Laws clenched his fists and asked, I can't deny that your proposal is tempting, but why her? Kalen smiled and said, it's no mystery, she has a natural talent for magic, and her mana reserves are even higher than those of an adult human. Living in this rural village is not the end of her life, and I'm sure you can see the same. Sooner or later, she will leave this house in search of more knowledge. What is there to fear if the door that is now opening to her is the safest? That. Then, who recommended my daughter? Law's wife asked with some curiosity. My lord is Gilgamesh, the prince of the Azura kingdom and the future king of this realm. Kalen opened both hands as if presenting a divine being. Laws, that's absurd. You know how nobles can be. This may seem tempting, but it could also be a trap. Sylphie's mother stopped when she realized she had said too much. Please forgive my wife, she tends to be very protective, and both of us become quite sensitive when it comes to our daughter's safety. Laws placed a hand on his wife's shoulder to calm her. But you haven't done anything to make her happy. Kalen's attitude changed completely when these people judged his lord, who had only good intentions. What did you say? Come on, you know what I mean. This god-forsaken village has caused your daughter a lot of harm with its absurd comments fueled by their damned ignorance. What have you done about it? Kalen looked at Laws and said, they won't be missed if you decide to come with us. Besides, I want you to be very clear about something. I'm not here to lick anyone's boots or kneel. That's not it, you're mistaken, Mr. Kalen, Laws said sincerely. Of course, I'm willing to give my daughter a better future. If what you say is true, then we are willing to accompany you. Laws, we should consult this with our daughter first. This time, no, a decision is made this way, and since she has a chance to shine, we are no one to prevent that. Laws said decisively. Kalen smiled and said, you have made a good decision, I'm sure both of you will lead your daughter to a new future. By the time Kalen's words ended, his perception sensed something approaching, so knowing that only the three of them were in the room, he raised his staff and struck it against the ground, creating one huge rune after another. Don't move! Boom! When Kalen's words ended, an explosion swept through the entire wooden house they were in, destroying everything in its path from the foundations. Due to the shield he conjured earlier, fortunately, they remained unharmed. Who dares to attack me? Kalen was furious and without speaking, materialized several ice shards emitting a frigid aura. It seems there's a powerful magenoid that disrupted my plans. If you leave now and leave these people behind, you won't die. An extremely faint voice sounded in the distance, deep within a forest. They are now under the protection of Gilgamesh. If you dare to go against his words, you will die a cruel death at our hands. Kalen said with a severe tone. Your lord is just a broken star. Are you sure he will win the impending war? That same voice asked as a corrupt magic attack approached Kalen's direction. At that moment, just as he was about to cast another spell, a suffocating battle aura burst forth, and a green-colored sword attack crushed the dark energy attack. Who is attacking us? Falcon, who was hundreds of meters away, appeared in front of the shattered house, with a dozen figures behind him, their swords drawn. An unknown enemy, located right at the entrance of the forest to our right. It seems to be near a cliff, moving into an open space. Kalen said as he used magic to sharpen his hearing. TCH, the enemy beat us to it. Falcon frowned as he thought. Turning around, he told the other knights, half of you go and find Sylphie, the rest come with me. Yes, sir. Are you talking about those kinds of enemies? Kalen couldn't believe it. It seems they also have some potential to cause trouble for our lord, completely defying the precautions taken when considering our enemy. Without saying another word, Falcon disappeared from the scene, but not before saying, "Take care of Sylphie's parents, they might be important for the future." "Don't worry, I'll step in once they are safe." Kalen nodded as he turned to look at Sylphie's parents with a kind smile. Chapter 86, Whom Do You Serve? Just before the conversation between Gilgamesh and the Withered Lord ended a few hours ago, he shared something important: "My enemy's apostles are on the move. They are desperate, so they will try to eliminate anyone of importance to me through foolish methods. They will attack. Well, that God, if he has the ability to see the future, knows perfectly well that the future changed drastically with my presence in this world. Unlike any other human, he can't manipulate me, let alone kill me so easily." Gilgamesh held his wine glass and said, "That's why he'll try to change the game board. Now, instead of killing me, something he'll find impossible, he'll try to get rid of the minor nuisances in his path by eliminating my potential wives, subordinates, and friends. He will take care of removing important pieces that would lead me to him and destroy him. So, I want to make sure everyone is aware of this." The Withered Lord nodded, looked at Gilgamesh, and asked more directly, "My lord, didn't you say the apostles are very weak and would take time to act?" "That's true, but remember that it wasn't predictable in that God's plan, and his apostles were likely in motion long before even you were born. He should have some puppets lurking in the world, and we won't know until he personally comes looking for us." "I understand, my lord, I will keep everyone alert." Village of Bana. Grere residence. Paul was training with his sword while Sylphie took care of their two growing daughters. She used to visit this house frequently after Rudius's departure. "Hey, Sylphie, would you like a glass of orange game juice?" Zenith asked as she approached with a glass of game juice for their son's little friend. However, at that very moment, a thunderous explosion rang out not far from their location, followed by a huge cloud of black smoke rising into the sky. Boom! What was that? Sylphie, like everyone else, was startled and rushed out of the house. Paul quickly sheathed his sword and furrowed his brow. He was ready to investigate, but from the corner of his eye, he saw several black shadows moving at almost indescribable speed towards his family. "Be careful, Zenith!" Paul shouted in a panic, but just as he was about to move, a sword's edge was at his throat. "Be cautious, sir, we are not the enemy." A cold voice sounded behind Paul, making him freeze in his tracks. His clouded eyes steadied, and he saw several knights in black armor beginning to surround his family. However, their approach was different. Instead of harming them, they were protecting them. "Who are you, and what's going on?" Paul broke out in a cold sweat because he didn't sense the presence of these unknown figures, but their armor indicated they were from the Azura Kingdom. "My name is Eric, King of the Sword in the Golden Lion's Edge technique. We are under attack by a hostile individual who seeks to kill that half-elf girl." Eric pointed at Sylphie as he felt the strong energies emanating from a distance. Paul, taken by surprise, frowned and shouted, "That's nonsense! Why would anyone want to harm a simple girl? Perhaps she is a girl in your eyes now, but in the future, she may become someone much more important. Maybe that's not her destiny, and she ends up being the mother of an incredibly powerful child. The statistics that you, as a simple knight, can see blind you to what will happen in the future. Stop interfering in the battle of two beings who can see the future and stay out of it." Eric ignored Paul and instead walked toward Sylphie. He gazed at this green-haired half-elf girl and said, "Your parents are fine. You were lucky that they were attacked when a class emperor magician with different magics was nearby, otherwise, a tragedy would have occurred." "My parents were attacked?" Sylphie asked, suddenly panicking. She immediately wanted to go to their aid, but a strong hand held her back and advised her, "Listen carefully, child. We have come to recruit you personally to become a student at the Tower of Mages in Ars, for reasons we still don't fully understand. Perhaps that caused the future to change, prompting a powerful being to attack directly to kill you. That doesn't make sense. She's just a child, and you are complete strangers." Zenith fell silent when she saw the knight's gazes. They too were confused. If even they didn't know what was happening, it meant that something was going wrong, and if something went wrong, not only they but everyone in this village would die. So, if the enemy is over there, what are you doing here? Paul looked at the knights with some consternation and said, no matter what you intend to do, I have to warn the people in the village who have taken refuge far away. Our captain will face the enemy, he is a sword emperor and is accompanied by 10 kings of the sword. If they can't eliminate the enemy, our only option is to flee with Sylphie while we inform our lord. How can they be so strong? Paul asked, confused. The magnitude of these people's strength made no sense. He could say with certainty that there was no more than one sword king, and that was Ghislaine, who was in the city. How could there be so many incredibly powerful beings, and all of them serving a single person? This doesn't make sense, but I still have a job to do here. Paul made a decision, put on his shirt, and looked at Zenith. I'll be back. In the house where Sylphie's parents were, they were just recovering from what had happened only seconds ago. What is happening? Kalen furrowed his brow deeply. Within the possibilities, according to our calculations and future predictions, there are several timelines that flow around each of our lives. In that regard, some beings are born with the ability to see the future, and my lord is one of them. Some time ago, through a twist of fate, he became an enemy of an ancient being who can see the future and different timelines, just like him. Kalen clenched his teeth and told these desperate parents about what was happening. In a way, that ancient being has a unique ability to enter the minds of any living being in this world and deceive us to the point of turning us into enemies of my lord. Those who now believe in the ancient lord's word are known as the apostles. My lord is a threat that can end the ancient lord, so the way to weaken my lord's power is through the murders of those who could be his potential wives, allies, and those who could pose a threat to the ancient being's survival. Are you saying my daughter is a target? Laws panicked. He had witnessed that attack, and it was not something he, a simple hunter, could stop. He was sure that if it weren't for Kalen, he and his wife would have died. Chapter 87, A Certain Enemy. You have a terrifying look. Falcon raised his sword and pointed it at the figure in front of him. Facing him, a scrawny but incredibly tall man wore an armor covered in dull scarlet, and several chains hung from various parts of his body. His weapon was a long spear, covered in blood and not revealing his face due to the helmet he carried. He stood still, looking directly into Falcon's eyes. You are all just a nuisance, call your lord to face me like a man. The figure slightly opened his mouth, and words were uttered in a grating tone. How dare you summon my lord with your filthy mouth, beast? I will tear your head from your body, open so many holes in your heart that the last sensation as you die will be watching me finish mutilating your corpse. Ha ha ha. Very well, first I'll finish off the infants so that the Father who created them appears before me. I will prove to my enlightenment that I am more than enough to eliminate that annoying ant who dared to defy my lord. The man in the red armor said, by the way, you can be proud to die at the hands of the Dark Bear. It seems his power surpasses that of an ordinary sword king, but we are not ordinary. Yes, first I'll cut his pride, but before that, we need to find out how skilled the enemy is and if he poses any real threat. Falcon, determined to eliminate the enemy, said, attack formation, eliminate the enemy in a coordinated strike. Yes, sir. At that moment, 10 battle auras burst forth in a golden tone, and an attack by an Emperor of the Sword and 6 kings moved in a coordinated formation. As they had learned, there is no honor on the battlefield, as the only thing sought is to come out alive. In this way, Falcon was leveraging his advantage to finish this without any anomalies. Yes, come. The man known as the Dark Bear lifted his spear and assumed a defensive stance. In this first attack, Falcon took the lead. His body disappeared and reappeared like a phantom behind his enemy. His body radiated a powerful battle aura subtly contained in every part of his body, making his speed akin to that of lightning. However, unlike his subordinates who were sword kings, his steps were silent and steady. As he moved towards the enemy, his feet didn't seem to be touching the ground. He barely grazed the surface as he moved at lightning speed, only to test what the enemy was made of. The Red Bear Man moved forward to meet him, matching his speed. He had released a completely different dark energy, unrelated to any form of magic. A powerful and bloodthirsty enemy was on the verge of making his first move. In just a few seconds, 7 figures had already begun to test their speed, which was vastly superior to that of any ordinary human. There was no comparison. Gilgamesh's knights had mastered their abilities, making them extremely powerful, and they were not chasing what seemed to be an apostle. Cutting through the dense forest, they reappeared in a clear landscape in mere seconds, moving from one place to another, only to return to a position similar to where they had been before. If you were to ask someone else, they might say this was unnecessary, but others would argue that they were studying their opponent during this time. Now, Falcon spun his body, momentarily increasing his speed, and the edge of his sword aimed for his enemy's head. The Dark Bear Man turned his body, and his sword received Falcon's strike, generating a wave of brute force clashes. Sword art, Lion's Roar. Boom! 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 3 sword arts of the same technique were launched at Falcon's back, but he had disappeared seconds before these attacks reached him, causing these sword techniques to hit the enemy directly. An enormous crater appeared at the site, but the figure of the Dark Bear Man had vanished. Following the trail of his aura, a Sword King who felt a presence to his left immediately expelled an abnormal amount of battle aura and brandished his sword. Boom! Acting instinctively, his sword collided with the strike of a crimson lance that would have decapitated him if he hadn't responded to the attack. However, due to his poor posture, his body was sent flying like an uncontrolled comet. Og! Sword art, Golden Slash. A knight swung his sword as he appeared in front of his enemy and precisely slashed across the chest, causing a wound from which blood spurted. However, Falcon, who had a better perception of the battle, knew that this cut was not deep enough. Defend yourself. The knight felt a black aura approaching, so instinctively, he raised his sword over his chest in an attempt to protect his most vital organ. Seconds later, the blade of the lance struck his sword, but miraculously, this last defensive move fulfilled its task, and the attack only pierced his shoulder. Boom! The wounded knight was sent flying by the attack and crashed into a thick tree, temporarily taken out of the fight. Chapter 88, Stalemate. In just a few minutes of battle, 2 Kings of the Sword had been taken out of combat in an extraordinary manner by the enemy. But the enemy didn't emerge unscathed, as a considerable wound bled from their chest, significantly diminishing their future prospects in this fight. But the others didn't stop and continued to attack, knowing that if they stopped for any reason, the condition of their comrades could become critical because they were unfamiliar with more attacks from their current enemy. Furthermore, the wounds the other knights had were minor, and they were confident they would recover soon. Boom! 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 Gravel and stones flew in all directions. Falcon took advantage of this moment to step forward and attack with all his might while preventing the enemy from using their lance in close quarters. As Falcon attacked, each of his blows was aimed at a vital area of his enemy's body. If any of his strikes landed, his enemy would likely lose so much blood that they would die in minutes, even if they were powerful. Falcon moved his sword, attempting to decapitate his enemy, but once again, it was met by the defense of the red lance. However, midway through, he reached out and mercilessly grabbed his enemy's throat. The Dark Bear Man raised his right shoulder and blocked, lifting the hand that had grabbed his throat. His right hand shot out at a speed similar to that of lightning, seeking to strike Falcon's head. Falcon managed to dodge that attack and, in response, delivered a powerful kick that struck his enemy's elbow, causing it to snap. After that, the sound of bones breaking could be heard clearly, and both opponents leaped away, establishing some distance. It turned out that Falcon's kick had managed to fracture his enemy's left elbow, significantly reducing his combat capabilities in this battle. This meant that the use of the enemy's lance would have fewer variations and obviously reduced strength. The man in the red armor couldn't help but be surprised that the kick had been so effective. He had vast experience as a fighter, having faced tremendously powerful foes for decades. However, this time was different because his opponent had achieved something that no one else had ever done before, breaking one of his limbs. The battle was far from over, in fact, it had only just begun. "Don't interfere, help the wounded and regroup." Falcon, who was stabilizing himself, burst into power and sped toward his enemy at a velocity even kings of the sword couldn't match. The dark bear man snorted coldly. This time, he wouldn't use any techniques to move. Instead, he raised his lance with his right hand, and a powerful aura emanated from his body, both to protect himself and to attack. A turbulent wind surrounded the dark bear man, enveloping him in a dark cloak. Numerous streams of battle aura were expelled from his body, concentrating at the tip of his lance, and his attacks immediately went for their target. The wind drew in a great snowstorm of dust, attracting a powerful concentration of energies and advantageous natural conditions toward it. In no time, a black serpent materialized, coiling around the right arm of the dark bear man. Boom! 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 Several impacts were heard, along with the sounds of powerful explosions. Finally, there was a fearsome snarl. The wind seemed to disperse any method of attack, and the tip of the lance suddenly appeared in front of Falcon. The dark bear man, who had taken 3 steps back, spat blood as pieces of armor fell from his body one after another. When he looked down, a clear punch mark appeared on his chest, and 2 deafening sounds were heard behind him. Kalen, who had arrived on the battlefield, pierced through the back of the dark bear man, who was standing in front of Falcon. These 2 effective strikes were enough to momentarily freeze the battle, halting everything that was happening for a few minutes. The dark bear man snarled coldly, took a deep breath, and suddenly let out a roar, "If you think I'm alone, you're sorely mistaken." This time, it was Falcon's turn to defend himself, doing the same thing his enemy had done before to avoid fatal blows. His 2 legs changed positions at an extreme speed, retreating from these attacks. But at that moment, he felt an attack coming from afar, so he leaned his entire body to the ground, narrowly avoiding that strike. Falcon, another enemy. Boom! Kalen, who raised his staff, chanted a powerful fire spell, "Spirit of Fire, shine and kill all in the west." Boom! Boom! The sky was filled with a crimson hue, and suddenly, the vast amount of mana released in this attack caused even the clouds to turn red. The powerful fire spell spread across the sky, revealing the enemy hidden in the heavens to everyone. "Can you hold on?" Falcon asked as he stood up. "Yes, don't worry," Kalen nodded as he conjured more powerful spells, each one aimed at this sudden enemy. Chapter 89, The Figure in the Sky. Sword Style, Thousand Pillar Attack. Using one of the last techniques he had learned from the combat style created by Gilgamesh especially for his people, several swords made of golden battle aura materialized behind him, forming a powerful attack slowly. Finally, creating a powerful disturbance in the surroundings and increasing the concentration of power more and more, Falcon launched himself forward. In an instant, 2 powerful impact sounds were heard. However, the golden light swords were launched at the chest and various parts of his enemy, piercing through him and causing horrible fatal wounds. When the dust cleared, there was a large crater in the ground, and the dark bear man was kneeling while continuously spitting out blood. His helmet fell off, and Falcon, who was sure it was a man, was pleasantly surprised, as in front of him was the face of a beautiful woman who was slowly losing her life. "You have released me, knight. My curse was to live as a man hated and repudiated by all humans. This is your victory." The dark bear man, or rather, the woman imprisoned within, was freed as death began to embrace her. She lifted her head and gazed at the beautiful blue sky that had cleared earlier due to Kalen's attack, with a certain sadness on her face. However, even though she knew she was dying, there was no regret, and she accepted her death with open arms. "Tell me, is the human god your lord?" Kalen asked as he sheathed his sword and walked slowly towards his enemy. "My name is Carla. The human god was the only one who saw my true face and promised to return my body to its original state. Although I knew he was lying, that feeling of trust and kindness was something I had never felt from any other human after leaving that labyrinth. You can think whatever you want, each of us serves a different god, we are just simple pawns. No, my lord is not a god, and he has never considered himself one, even though we all happily declare him our god. He is just a human with the same flaws, mistakes, and desires to protect what he can within his abilities. As for yours, it's just a simple god who hides and sends only his apostles to a lost battle." In the end, although his enemy was similar in strength to a sword emperor, Falcon's final attack ended up destroying his enemy. Without any consideration, he watched as the enemy bled out and slowly died. In a life-or-death battle, Falcon saw how his men enriched themselves with experience, and those wounds he now had on his body were more than enough for them to learn how much they lacked to be strong. Boom! At that moment, Kalen, who was facing an unknown figure in the air, began using increasingly powerful spells, shaking the earth and creating powerful gusts of wind due to the impacts in the air. "It's a pity she died so pitifully." "Well, she was just a simple pawn." A voice interrupted Falcon's thoughts as he guarded Kalen's back. In front of them, an incredibly ordinary-looking being appeared, but in its hands, it held a silvery metallic sword. However, when they least expected it, that sword in its hand pierced its own chest, and every part of its body began to expand at an alarmingly abnormal rate. "What kind of demon is that?" Kalen shouted as he prepared to cast an Emperor-class fire spell. "I don't know, but we'd better attack." Falcon didn't want to waste time, so he instructed Kalen to unleash his best and most powerful spell to eliminate this new enemy in an instant. "Understood." Kalen raised his magical staff and said in a cold tone, "Meteor shower of the yellow abyss, shine and embrace all my enemies." The instant he spoke those words, a powerful concentration of magic was directed towards a single attack, and in an instant, the attack was formed and launched seconds after being created. The powerful wave of the attack caused even the ground to split open, generating powerful waves of heat. Falcon's eyes widened in surprise. This magical attack was truly terrifying, and he was sure that even if the enemy was stronger than the previous one, this attack was more than enough to win and defeat the enemy. Boom! When the explosion swept over the enemy, disaster spread over several hundred meters, creating a powerful shockwave that raised a thick curtain of smoke. The fire used in this attack formed into several powerful circles that were launched continuously like meteorites. When one hit, two more followed and further devastated the battlefield. Boom! Boom! However, just as everyone believed they had won, a charred figure shot out of the flame curtain, heading towards Kalen, who had just released a powerful spell. "This? How is this possible? The putrid Emperor-class spell should have pulverized his body. So why is the enemy still moving?" When Kalen wanted to cast a defensive spell, his mind went blank, and he didn't know what to do. However, right at that moment, Falcon appeared with a powerful battle aura and confronted the enemy head-on. 1, 2, 3 sword strikes shook the surroundings, and 3 horrible wounds appeared on the enemy's chest. "Is he dead?" "No, he's not," shouted one of the sword emperors who was still standing nearby, as he saw a powerful punch break through the dust and strike his captain. Falcon felt his body being shaken with great force, then he was sent flying, and his body sank into the earth due to the strong impact. Crash! Chapter 90, The True Power. Everyone, follow the hunters who are signaling. Don't panic, there are knights already facing the enemies. Paul shouted as he took charge of maintaining calm in the village. They all watched as Law's house was reduced to ashes, so they feared the same fate for their homes. Even without knowing the details of what was happening, they followed the instructions of the knight stationed in their village to ensure the safety of the place. It was hard for everyone to believe that something like this was happening. Aside from a few aggressive beasts that hunters occasionally encountered in the forest, there was nothing else they should worry about. But it seemed that things were far more serious, to the extent that they could die if anything went even slightly wrong. "Paul, do you know what's going on? The children are scared." A middle-aged woman approached the strongest man in their village and asked this question. "I don't know either. I can only tell you with absolute certainty that the knights will take care of whatever is happening," Paul said with a reassuring look. But at that moment, he saw a large stone approaching from the sky. "Om! Everyone, get down!" Paul shouted, warning everyone before preparing to make a move. "I've got this, knight!" A voice sounded nearby, and a knight launched himself like a phantom, attacking the stone with a battle aura, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Eric, who had abandoned his previous position, appeared on the field, followed by 3 more figures who didn't stop and advanced toward the area where the battle was unfolding. "How's the battle going?" Paul approached Eric and asked. Eric looked ahead and frowned. An Emperor-class mage, a swordsman, and 6 King-class warriors are facing truly formidable enemies, which is why the battle is taking so long. Although we're not Class S, we're ranked as formidable even within the ranks of Uruk's warriors. Are there stronger ones than you? Paul asked unconsciously. Of course, there are even groups of women who are far superior to us. We're just a group that has recently graduated from the Uruk Tower, so we're not that strong, but by no means are we considered weak. But if things continue like this, we're obligated to report to our lord, Eric said as he walked slowly toward the battlefield. I recommend you not come, but if you're not afraid of death, you can satisfy your curiosity. That's... Paul looked at one of the hunters nearby and said, "Take charge of evacuating the people, I'll go to that place to see how things are going." "Be careful, Paul." By the time Eric arrived, he saw with his own eyes a dozen warriors facing a massive monster that stood holding a huge, heavy sword. Under its feet, the ground was completely shattered. "Kalen, what's happening?" When Kalen sensed Eric's presence, his eyes took on a troubled expression. He looked at the beast a few meters away and said, "This beast keeps regenerating its body every time Falcon cuts it, and its speed and strength become more brutal as time passes. According to my calculations, every time it takes a hit, it multiplies the damage it deals with its attacks. Does that mean we can't defeat it?" Eric couldn't see any other way out of the embarrassing situation they were in. "It's not like that," Kalen shook his head, fixed his gaze on the beast, and explained, "As far as I understand, there's some sort of core in that monster, and unless it's destroyed, it can regenerate as many times as it wants. However, when I cast a magical spell on it, it condenses its particles around the core to prevent its destruction. Magic doesn't seem to result in a prolonged damage effect on its body, so I'm only focused on slowing down its movements and supporting the knights in avoiding its attacks with precision." Kalen also couldn't cast spells materializing ice or stone spears since this method would result in the same outcome as Falcon's attacks. This beast resembled an orc, but its body was larger, and its regeneration made no sense. In this world, although there were terrible creatures, no one had ever seen an ogre like the one they had in front of them. Gilgamesh didn't know of any related creatures, but if he were to guess, he would say it was a summoned spirit. Very few were capable of creating spirits and then summoning them, so this achievement could be considered significant in the realm of magic. Gilgamesh had wanted to create a spirit with his divine energy and then summon it to see what kind of being would emerge, but he had been busy recently and hadn't had time for such hobbies. "Damn it, what kind of creature is this?" Falcon, in the distance, continued to split the ogre's body multiple times with powerful attacks, but none seemed to work. The new knights who had arrived immediately launched an attack, helping to regulate the team and stabilize those who were tired or wounded. The initial attacks took us by surprise. I myself was severely injured by the powerful strike resulting from Kalen's attack. Despite being in this situation, everyone remained calm because the enemy was just incredibly tough to eliminate but didn't pose a real threat. When Paul arrived, he saw the terrible beast and all the chaos in the surroundings. This can't be. Despite having been an adventurer, Paul had never before seen a creature survive such powerful attacks from two sword emperors. It's grotesque, isn't it? Eric greeted Paul while helping one of his comrades tend to a wound before it was treated by Kalen. Can you eliminate it? Paul was confused since most of the swordsmen were sitting on the ground, drinking water and watching the battle's progress with confusion. It's complicated. Eric didn't know how to respond to Paul. It's complicated to kill something that is constantly being supplied with energy by its owner. A voice interrupted the people's communication, and at that moment, several swords shot out of the air and headed towards the large enemy being confronted by two sword emperors. Careful, get back! Kalen warned his people, who were at a considerable distance from the huge monster when those swords were launched. Boom! 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 The already devastated ground was obliterated, and everyone was forced to retreat, watching as just 3 projectiles completely destroyed the monster they were fighting. My lord, I deeply regret not being able to meet your standards. Kalen knelt before an 11-year-old boy who had suddenly appeared before them all. Prince Gilgamesh. Paul was paralyzed, seeing how a boy just a little older than his son was stronger than a sword emperor. Chapter 91, What's your choice? They sure got a beating. I should send them the new modifications to my Golden Lion sword style. Well, we'll talk about that later. As Gilgamesh walked forward, the gigantic ogre reformed and directed a gaze filled with murderous intent towards him. He perceived this as nothing more than the sight of a small dog barking without really knowing whom it's barking at. But considering that things had been quite dull in ROA lately, this time he would show off a bit in front of everyone. I don't even want to know why you attacked this village or what your intentions are. I'll figure that out with my own eyes later, so don't bother telling me anything. Gilgamesh seemed a bit serious as he looked at Falcon and said, watch this spectacle from above, or it won't be interesting. Yes, my lord. Kalen immediately waved his hand, and a floating ship appeared behind them. After boarding it, they rose into the sky, looking down where Gilgamesh stood doing nothing. Is he going to fight alone? Paul didn't seem to agree with the choice these knights had made. Even if Gilgamesh is powerful, they shouldn't have left him alone. Even if Rudius is strong, as a father, he wouldn't let him fight alone against an unknown creature. We'll only interfere if necessary. We're not on his level, after all. Falcon, who had been healed by Kalen, watched closely what was happening below. Just pay attention and don't speak. All the gods believe they have the authority to meddle in my decisions, come to kill those who will be something to me in the future, or try to wage wars against me. Gilgamesh, who had ceased to be as arrogant as before due to Eris's presence, today once again showed his eyes to the world, releasing an aura so arrogant that even the gods bowed before him. Come, Ea! As he uttered those words, a golden ripple shone intensely on the ground, and a pressure that shook the surroundings began to unconsciously emanate. The sky turned black, crimson lightning flashed, and a bladeless sword appeared in Gilgamesh's hand, releasing an aura of power that could crush any god. What must I prove for you to patiently wait in your place until I decide to visit you personally? At this moment, Gilgamesh looked down at the gods, demonstrating that with his presence alone, he could crush them without leaving any trace of their past, present, or future. His divinity was omnipotent, making even monsters or demons unable to raise their gaze to his eyes. No one was worthy of looking at him at the same level, at least not here. He hadn't met anyone worthy of even calling a friend. This sword can only be used by me, a unique existence in this universe, incapable of being surpassed, and suitable only for a ruler. The weapon Gilgamesh held had an abnormal shape that didn't fit the typical classification of a sword in this world. It was something that existed before the concept that this world called a sword, so it couldn't truly be called a sword, nor did it have the shape of a known blade. As Gilgamesh held his sword by the hilt, a stream of energy began to surround him, growing stronger with each passing second. As the energy concentrated, the tip of the sword itself began to spin in a spiral. Boom! As the ground sank, Gilgamesh soared directly into the sky and looked down at the motionless monster below him. How much will be enough to not destroy this world? Gilgamesh raised his sword, which had the form of a cylindrical pillar, like a drill, composed of 3 rotating segments engraved with crimson cuneiform letters that spun slowly in alternating directions. The same weapon from the universe. This was the first time Gilgamesh would use his most trusted weapon in combat, the one with which he had killed numerous apostles in his past life with the power of a god. An weapon with which he had pulverized divine, ancient, and cosmic beasts. Boom! The aura forming around Gilgamesh was enough to completely obliterate a city the size of Roa, but he didn't stop there. He decided that the power he would unleash would be even greater. Both the monster on the ground and other powerful divinities in this world felt the terrifying power Gilgamesh was releasing at this moment. Now, very few could match the power about to be unleashed. Gilgamesh only looked at that monster, and through his eyes, he saw the human god lurking like a shadow behind that individual. Lowering his weapon, he muttered only a few words, Enuma Elish. Boom! The thunderous power unleashed was a strange combination of energies, all concentrated and directed toward a specific location with brutality. The energy of the attack swept across the plains and shot forward. Boom! Any response attack would be reduced to nothing, disappearing from reality. This attack, seemingly originating from a god, completely pulverized the enemy, and to those nearby, it seemed like the end of the world. Is that attack from a mere human? Paul fell to the ground with no strength in his legs, and the others were no different. Never before in their lives had they seen such a terrifying attack capable of annihilating an entire city. A loud explosion echoed, and a hole as deep as an abyss was being created on the ground due to Gilgamesh's unstoppable attack. Those far away threw themselves to the ground, animals fled in panic, and the wind severely damaged the nearby village houses. On the ground, after Gilgamesh had released only 1% of his power with a massive crater lay where it seemed to have no end. The monster that had caused so much trouble to Falcon's group had disappeared without a trace. Spectators watched this scene with pale expressions. Even the Emperor Dragon's greatest attack couldn't cause this magnitude of damage. Moreover, it seemed that the just released attack had no weak form that others could defend against. Once again, human god, you have lost. Gilgamesh said this indifferently as he walked toward the edge of the crater. However, as if something, an entity, wanted to continually present problems to Gilgamesh, a white figure appeared not too far away. Without showing any negative intentions, he saluted respectfully and said, "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, my lord. My name is Almanfi of the Bright, and my lord Pelagiastola sent me to investigate what happened in this place." Gilgamesh didn't sheath his but instead looked directly at this masked man, who seemed arrogantly demanding information about what had happened, as if this were his backyard into which he could enter without any problem. Chapter 92, Seconds. "Isn't that the armored dragon?" Gilgamesh asked as he looked at the man in the white mask. Almanfi's voice turned notably cold. His gaze shifted towards Gilgamesh, and he responded with more firmness this time, "Pelagiastola is a high-ranking member of the dragon tribe, bearing the title Armored Dragon King and one of the 7 great heroes who sealed the demon god Laplace 500 years ago. He currently resides in the floating castle Chaos Breaker, awaiting the resurgence of the demon god. Should I personally thank him for his great deeds?" Gilgamesh asked, tilting his head forward slightly, expecting a response. "What? As far as I'm concerned, sealing an enemy is a clear humiliation and defeat. If you can't kill your enemy, then you've lost. Now he's in that floating fortress, traveling back and forth, waiting for the resurgence of another enemy." Gilgamesh vanished, and when he reappeared, he was in front of Almanfi, who hadn't reacted in time. The moment he realized what was about to happen, he gathered all his strength to defend himself. Boom! A loud explosion resounded. Almanfi, who was the one affected, suffered significant damage to his body. He crashed to the ground, making it impossible for him to get up for a while. If you're looking for information, tell him that Gilgamesh was the cause. Furthermore, remind him that if he's afraid that enemies from the past will be released in this era, I will take care of eliminating them myself. This time, I'll be kind, but next time, if he wants answers, tell him to come himself and not send a weak spirit like you. Gilgamesh, who had arrived in front of Almanfi, whispered, in addition, tell him that his enemies are of no importance to me. I'm already busy searching for a certain god who likes to play hide and seek. If your lord knows what I mean, tell him that we might meet in person when the time comes. I will deliver your message. Almanfi said this while looking at the large crater behind Gilgamesh, implying that he was still trying to understand what had happened here. Are you still interested in that? I killed a god's fly for you. If the one you serve is perceptive and strong enough, he will understand what kind of energies were present in this place. He will know perfectly well whom I eliminated and why I did it. If he can't understand that, then he's not worth my attention. Gilgamesh sheathed his weapon in the gate of Babylon and brushed the dust off his chest. Then I shall take my leave and deliver your message to my lord. Almanfi glowed in a golden light and disappeared from the location. Gilgamesh made no move and watched Almanfi disappear. His presence was merely interesting in his eyes. Nevertheless, he wanted to know in detail what had happened in this place without having to search for it himself. My lord, was that an enemy? Kalen arrived at the forefront and asked this question in a doubtful tone. Gilgamesh turned his head, looked at him, smiled slightly, and said, "It's not about an enemy. By the way, what happened in this place from the beginning? We came to recruit the girl named Sylphie, as you had proposed, but she wasn't at home, so I decided to talk to her parents first. Just at that moment, we were attacked by an enemy that Falcon took care of eliminating. As Kalen explained, they arrived in front of a woman who had been dead for some time, surprising many who didn't know she was a woman. It turns out she's a woman, and that corrupted energy still has dense traces of another being. That seal on her body was similar to Elaine's, so this must have happened to her if I hadn't eliminated it in time. I must come to understand that it happened because she didn't succumb to the curse unlike this woman. This is very interesting indeed." Gilgamesh could see the seal that had cursed the woman in front of him, so there's no need to draw further conclusions about her condition. What makes this interesting is that there might be more apostles much closer than he thought, so he must be even stricter with his precautions and pay more attention to the small details. "Oh, Prince Gilgamesh, I must thank you for helping save our village. There are no words to describe the gratitude we feel for solving this problem," Paul spoke, not having the chance to arrange his words properly, so he blurted them out when he finally had the opportunity to speak. "I am a prince of this kingdom, and that is the least I can do with my status. Moreover, I will certainly help those in need, even if they are ignorant." Gilgamesh's response was simple and straightforward, causing some surprise in Paul, who knew little about the prince in front of him. "My lord, should we at least take that girl named Sylphie with us? Her future may be somehow connected to you." Kalen made this suggestion that caught everyone's attention. Gilgamesh nodded and said, "I will send her to Elaine. She is a woman of the same race as Sylphie and can train her better. She has the talent to shine, so it would be a shame for her to stay in that place. Besides, she will be properly protected there." Paul took a step forward and asked, "Why were those people looking for a girl? Sylphie is a friend of my son, so I should at least protect those who are part of my family." Chapter 93, What Happened? Well, where do I begin? Gilgamesh walked a bit slower as the others headed towards the group of people who were still frightened by the disaster. "From what I can gather, every race once had a supreme god, someone who stood above all, protecting and guiding their respective civilizations. I understand that for now, only one god is my enemy, the others have disappeared or died for reasons I don't care about. The dragon god might know something about it, but until I meet him, I can't say much more beyond my vague knowledge of this world. When Gilgamesh least expected it, he had talked too much with this man who was Paul's father, but he continued nonetheless, I will kill the human god who intruded into one of my dreams, I will find him, I'm sure of that. If you're wondering who attacked us, when that god enters your dreams and speaks to you, you slowly become a messenger of God, better known as an apostle. That's. Paul was a simple man with worldly desires and flaws, a common father who wasn't prepared, but still faced life. Gilgamesh had seen glimpses of his future after the teleportation event, and certainly, this man's ending was tragic, a death that was the most avoidable of all. He knew he needed to prepare for the future, and he needed a strong ally in case Rudius somehow tried to rebel against him. What better ally than the father himself? That human god is certainly a deity, and many humans believe he's practically their god. But he's much worse than you think. He looks into futures and alternate timelines beyond our reality to maintain his power and ensure nothing can threaten him. I made a promise to myself not to see the future of any woman I meet, after all, I don't want to know if she'll become one of my wives again. Gilgamesh was a variant in this reality, but he had seen in the future that Gilgamesh would actually become one of his wives. When he vaguely saw two more figures, he decided to immediately cut off his ability to see into the future. But now that he thinks about it, there's no use deceiving himself. He knew that in the future, he would have 3 wives, as he had set out to do, and he really didn't want to know who the other 2 were. In that case, are you saying that Sylphie will become someone so important that she can threaten the existence of a god? Paul couldn't believe it. If she is that dangerous, wouldn't his son be equally a threat? Maybe not her, but her son or grandson. The future is not just about oneself, but about the consequences of our existence. Gilgamesh looked at Paul and asked, "Do you want the power to protect your family?" Paul looked at Gilgamesh and fell silent. He didn't understand what he meant when he asked that question, but if he had an ability to see the future, he must have seen something. Did something happen to me in the future that can be avoided by being strong? I don't need anything from you, I simply want you to become a knight of the Tower of Uruk under my command. If you do that, not only will I give you impressive power, but I will also provide a way to ensure that God doesn't interfere in the lives of your family. Gilgamesh opened a golden ripple, and a beautiful black sword appeared. In his previous life, if it weren't for the war, he would have given away all his treasures. But this time, he does it because he needs good subordinates and reliable tools to deal with certain troubles that may arise. If he has Paul as one of his followers, and if that Rudius, who is a reincarnate, becomes a nuisance, his own father will take care of stopping him, and family drama will handle those simple problems. When Paul saw that sword, he felt that he should accept that power. He had seen with his own eyes how weak he was and how easily he would have died if it weren't for the presence of these people. When he imagined what would have happened to his daughters and wives, he couldn't even think about the pain it would have meant. I accept it, I want to become stronger, Prince Gilgamesh. Paul knelt before a child and pledged his loyalty with all his heart. I know you feel a certain hatred not only for the nobility but also for how weak you are compared to others, so if you want to be considered strong, you must do more than just strive. Gilgamesh placed the sword in Paul's hands, which carried not only his blessing but also certain enhancements. Many things would happen in the future, and they couldn't predict all of them. But even so, Gilgamesh wants to have his own clothes and protected, and he will educate this kingdom with the word of man, thus eliminating any harmful religion for humans. He did it once, and he will do it here too, regardless of the consequences. You must go back because these people trust you, Paul. Gilgamesh walked toward the village while Paul was still kneeling. Yes. Chapter 94, Generosity. Those men haven't stopped being around me, does that have anything to do with that boy named Gilgamesh? Sylphie asked herself that question when she saw several guards walking behind her after she approached where her parents were. In her life, she had always been a very distrustful girl. However, Sylphie knew that she couldn't always be that way, so she was determined to change. Still, she didn't dare to say anything about it. Gilgamesh was scary, he seemed to be one of the countless children who had labeled her as a demon. Some knights had withdrawn a while ago. Even Lord Paul had also gone to where the fight was unfolding, but for a while now, there had been no sound. She was strong, but she couldn't just go there and cast one of her spells after seeing the sky turn red due to the flames. When everyone returned, Paul appeared far behind, and indeed, Gilgamesh was by his side. When Sylphie heard that he would send a mage to take her to the city of Ars, she didn't pay much attention to it, but now everything had changed because he was here to take her away. Paul's face was very cheerful. In fact, there were clear signs of happiness. When he arrived in front of everyone, he shouted, "I have news about what just happened, I'll tell you everything you want to know." The village was about to be attacked by very powerful beasts, but the knights led by Prince Gilgamesh managed to eliminate the beast. There is no longer any danger to worry about, so we will be safe for a few days. So, do you mean that these beasts will appear frequently from now on? Is that true? It can't be. In just a few seconds, chaos fell among the people, so the fear in their hearts that had been suppressed completely clouded their thinking, and some even refused to believe what was happening. At that moment, Gilgamesh raised his hand for Paul to continue speaking and introduced himself directly, "I am Gilgamesh Azura, the fourth prince, and I fully understand your fears. But you must not panic, those monsters are not very common, and the fight just now drove away all those that were nearby. If your concern is so great, I can send my knights to investigate beyond the forest and find out if there is no other enemy of that magnitude. But you must know that the same thing will not happen again, it doesn't work that way." When everyone saw Gilgamesh, they immediately fell silent. After all, they were in the presence of Prince Gilgamesh. Someone much more important than any ordinary noble, this was a prince who could become their future king. What is Prince Gilgamesh doing in this place? Well, it's not that many understand nobles, and it's not like they really care. What arouses their curiosity is what a prince was doing in this part of the kingdom, where even the feudal lords of Ctto had never appeared before. I know you all are afraid, but you must not let that negative feeling torment your thoughts. You must be stronger than that because no one is free living in fear. Gilgamesh looked at Sylphie, who was hiding among her parents, and gave her a faint smile. Then he looked at everyone and said, "Because you have all suffered in one way or another, you will receive 10 Asura gold coins each to repair whatever was damaged." "Thank you very much, Prince Gilgamesh. We are all grateful." Some were surprised by Prince Gilgamesh's humility, while others cried directly because of it. After all, no one is so crazy as to give away hundreds, perhaps thousands of Asura gold coins. It should be known that with 2 coins, a family can live for a few months, which is simply incredible. "All right, Kalen, take care of delivering the coins by family." Gilgamesh took out a bag with 10,000 coins and then walked directly to Sylphie, who was with her parents, still worried about the complete destruction of their house. "Mr. Gilgamesh, I must thank you for the help you have offered us. If it weren't for Kalen, we wouldn't be right here at this moment," Law said as he looked at Gilgamesh. "Your home was completely destroyed, do you want to come with me and go to Ars so that your daughter can train in magic? You don't have to worry, anyone under my care doesn't suffer discrimination or hunger." Gilgamesh looked toward the other people and said, "You have nothing here, it would be good for you to start anew in Ars. But that city is very expensive." Law's worried about not being able to protect his family, let alone feed them. "I have various businesses under my own care, I ensure the protection of those working for me, so there will be no one who dares to harm you. Money, on the other hand, is not a problem, you can take this and take care of buying clothes for yourself, your wife, and your daughter." Gilgamesh handed him a pouch with 1,000 gold coins. "No, this is too much. Sylphie's mom couldn't accept so much money." But Laws reached out his hand and said, "Then we will be in your care, I hope my daughter can have a bright future. Dad, what are you saying? Sylphie didn't understand what her father meant. Daughter, we are going to the city of Ars. There, you will learn more about magic and acquire knowledge that very few privileged individuals can obtain. Laws knelt down to his daughter's level and explained in detail what they had discussed with Kalin. But I have to wait for Rudius, he will come back. Sylphie didn't want to leave this place, mainly because Rudius could return at any moment. You shouldn't depend on your friend so much, daughter. Sylphie's mother smiled and knew exactly what was worrying her daughter, so she advised, you should become even more amazing for when you reunite. Gilgamesh looked at Sylphie and said, he wants to go to the magic school. You can go there when you are ready to travel. I may also visit that place myself, but only briefly. Then it's okay. Sylphie wasn't sure what to think of Gilgamesh. Her shyness and lack of contact with other children made it difficult for her to talk to people other than Rudius. Besides, she didn't have good experiences with other children besides her only friend. Gilgamesh then said, now that it's settled, we will leave as soon as possible. Just let Kalin finish resolving the money issue, and we will depart immediately. Having decided what to do, Gilgamesh sought out Kalin to take charge of preparing a ritual for Paul, integrating him into his forces. However, he wouldn't be removed from this place. Gilgamesh didn't plan to change things too much because it didn't benefit him much. On the contrary, after the magical incident, things would work in his favor. Chapter 95, What do you expect from life? As the hours passed, everyone returned to their homes, especially those who needed to repair the damage caused. Kalin, on the other hand, went directly to the massive pit created by Gilgamesh to seal it securely enough to prevent anyone from accidentally falling in. Falcon, on his part, prepared a blood ritual for Paul, who was about to receive a power boost throughout his body. Based on his potential and age, it was highly likely he could become a Sword King if he worked hard enough. In addition to that, he received a manual for the Golden Lion sword style that Gilgamesh had prepared. This new version he had created was perfect, much faster, quieter, and stronger than before. Having improved the styles he had created previously, this new sword style was incredibly powerful and quite possibly unmatched in this world. The 9 techniques of this sword style were sufficient to defeat any enemy, not to mention the movement technique and the situations for which this sword style was designed. On the ship, Sylphie was looking in awe as it floated above the ground without any kind of automatic mechanism. This was new to many, so even the adults watched this floating ship in amazement. Does that girl hate me? Gilgamesh's eyes narrowed in contemplation. Then, approaching her, he said, have you thought about what awaits you once you arrive in Ars? There are many children like you, all trying to learn magic to have a much better life in the future. I hope that at least my parents will be happy in that new place. They have been sad since our home was destroyed by that monster. So I will become strong enough to be the one who protects them. Sylphie momentarily forgot who she was talking to. Her response was not only for Gilgamesh but also for herself. Interesting answer. Did your friend Rudius teach you magic? Gilgamesh couldn't help but show interest. This girl is a younger version of Elaine, after all, although she has green hair instead of Elaine's black hair with white streaks, Elaine's green eyes can be reflected in this hair color. Yes, he's an amazing person, and the one I admire most in this world. By the way, did you meet Rudius? Sylphie looked at Gilgamesh differently, feeling less uncomfortable. Well, we only exchanged a few words. Although we're not friends, I think in the future, we might get along. Gilgamesh smiled awkwardly, lying to a child. The idea of eliminating this girl's friend had even crossed his mind when he first met him. I'm glad. I thought you were much scarier. I mean, I thought you weren't interested in relating to a half-elf like me. No one ever has in this village except for Rudius, so I'm sorry for misinterpreting your actions. Sylphie bowed repeatedly to Gilgamesh, showing her sincere apology. I've read about the different races in the world, among them, elves are the closest to humans, but they live many years longer. Although the most surprising thing about all of this is that when they have a child with a human, that child's lifespan is the same as that of humans. I know what many fear, but I don't usually pay much attention to such things. Gilgamesh said as he leaned against the ship's railing and watched the approaching evening. Sylphie remained silent, her conflicting thoughts about Gilgamesh truly perplexing. When Gilgamesh felt it was enough, he jumped onto the ship's railing and said to Sylphie, "In the Tower of Uruk, there's a very beautiful woman. She will be your teacher. If you're lucky, you may become an incredible mage." "Wait, you're not coming to ours?" Sylphie asked, confused. "Of course not, my journey is just beginning." At that moment, Gilgamesh's body began to glow, and eventually, his entire body turned into golden particles that disappeared before Sylphie's eyes. "We'll meet again." City of Roa. Grere Mansion. Eris was training alone with the combat method Gilgamesh had given her before he left without saying a word. She was annoyed with him for not taking her to that place, so she memorized the moves she had also seen Ghislaine learning. "Why did he leave without taking me?" Eris was lying on her stomach on the back of the huge lion, who had become her best friend after Rudius. "Haven't you seen how strong I've become since he arrived?" Eris opened her calm eyes and looked at the huge cat, who was licking one of his paws. "Do you sympathize with me too?" Roar. "Yes, we must punish him. But what could we do to annoy him? Honestly, I've never bothered him before, and he never reacted badly before. Is all of this because of her?" Regardless of her age, Eris didn't understand why Gilgamesh had chosen her as his fiancée. There were more charming women than her, so she couldn't fully comprehend how things had changed in that way. But despite those thoughts, she had been much happier since Gilgamesh came to her home. Furthermore, Rudius seemed to be a good teacher, although she didn't want to learn magic because it took time away from her sword training. Her main goal was to defeat Gilgamesh in swordsmanship, not with magic. "Someday, I'm going to beat him." Eris muttered these words, but her senses alerted her that someone was in front of her. Opening her eyes, she saw a young man very close to her, and due to the surprise, she remained silent for a few moments. "Who do you want to beat?" Gilgamesh, who had seen Eris resting on her cat, decided to approach her to greet her. "No one." Eris turned her head somewhat embarrassed. "Hey, speaking of wanting to beat someone, don't you want to see something interesting?" Gilgamesh asked, seeing that Eris had avoided his question. "Is it something interesting?" Eris's eyes lit up with excitement at the thought of something Gilgamesh considered interesting. "Of course, come with me." Chapter 96, The Basics. "What do you want to show me?" Eris gave Gilgamesh a questioning look as he stared at the ground lost in thought. "Well, even though my knowledge of magic is tiny, to say the least, what I'm going to show you is how I summon a spirit to serve me." Gilgamesh took out the same magic book he had won from those guys at the gambling house. "Is it some kind of magic spell?" Eris didn't understand what Gilgamesh meant because she was just starting to learn the most basic magic. "Exactly, a spell where I'll theoretically summon a spirit to be my servant, but I'll change summon to create, and I hope it works." Gilgamesh was immersed in explaining the contents of the book and, since he didn't need to read it twice, he quickly covered the fundamentals. As Eris walked and looked at that enormous book, which could have thousands of pages, she became more and more excited about what might come from this spell. "I have some understanding of spirit summonings, but if I can modify things, I could summon a valuable soul through a precious object and a contract that binds them to me. They could be spirits from the past, present, or future. Even if we delve deeper into probability, they could be from other worlds, places we may never visit in our lives." Gilgamesh summoned a golden ripple and from it took out a chain with 2 knives attached to each end, then placed it on the ground and stroked his chin as he thought. "If I happen to use powerful weapons, and somehow their owners, the souls of their owners, are summoned as servants, will they remember me in any way?" Many things can go wrong, but I won't stop trying. After taking out the weapon, Gilgamesh also began to scatter spirit cores around the weapon on the ground. Eris, who had witnessed all of this, remained silent, both curious and expectant. Well, I think that's it. Gilgamesh had already put the magic book away and was looking at everything, analyzing whether there might be any errors or failures to avoid. You need to know that spirits are beings capable of shifting between a spiritual and a material body at will. While they are in spiritual form, they can't be easily detected by enemies because they are invisible to the naked eye and to most forms of scrutiny, nor can they be affected by physical interference. With just that, can you summon a spirit to serve you? I don't see it as feasible, it shouldn't be that easy. Eris simply voiced her thoughts as she looked at the weapon on the ground. It may fail, this is the first time I'm doing it, so this plan is subject to changes and errors, but I'm confident I'll succeed. Gilgamesh didn't lift his gaze as he said this, continuously analyzing the outcome. I was only hoping that a powerful servant would arise from all of this. I couldn't rely on the strength of my subordinates right now because they were still learning the new battle style I had shared with them. It didn't make sense to me, at least, and they lacked a lot of combat experience. As far as I understood, spirits needed to maintain a certain amount of energy to remain materialized and fight, and they needed an anchor to the world, which could be their summoner or any other physical being. Their current strength was reflected in their energy reserves, so energy depletion was directly proportional to their diminishing strength. This type of summoning will be done with a catalyst. I'll attract the spirit with those objects on the ground, and I hope it's worth it. Gilgamesh extended his hand, his divine power connected with the spirit orbs and the weapon on the ground. Closing his eyes, he began to speak. I, Gilgamesh, King of Heroes, Emperor of Humanity, and sole ruler under the heavens, command you to emerge in this world and serve me as your sole lord. Fantastic! Eris was amazed by what she was witnessing, the energy, the unfamiliar words Gilgamesh was uttering, and the golden aura that began to emanate all around made everything feel so magical. Boom! The ground shook, alarming everyone in the castle, but Gilgamesh didn't stop and poured as much energy as this ritual required. Then, as if he had succeeded, a vague figure began to appear before his eyes, and finally, as if the ritual had been completed successfully, there was a loud explosion. Boom! What happened? Eris shouted as she looked at Gilgamesh in front of her. I think it was a success. Gilgamesh said as he looked at the tattoo that appeared on his left hand. You think it was a success? Eris ignored Gilgamesh's arrogance and examined the details she could see through the dust. When the smoke cleared, a woman appeared before them, kneeling on the ground, and said, My name is Medusa, and I am at ease now that my lord is someone much more extraordinary than I. Your name is Medusa. Eris was captivated by this beautiful blindfolded woman. Medusa materialized in a way different from her legend, one that even Gilgamesh was unaware of, maintaining a human appearance, with no snakes in her hair, and long purple-colored hair. She wears a blindfold to seal her powerful mystic eyes of petrification within a delimited field. Her sight is completely sealed, although she can perceive through hearing, touch, smell, and detection magic, which allows her to gather more accurate information than through sight. You can call me Raider, Master. Medusa directed her gaze toward Gilgamesh, who was standing in front of her. I can see that you are very powerful and similar to me in terms of weaponry. How strong are your abilities? Gilgamesh asked as he looked at this woman holding the weapon he had placed on the ground. In general terms, I'm not extremely strong in close combat, but my class allows me to use any type of weapon, and my enhanced advantages include extreme speed. Additionally, I can perceive any type of situation within kilometers as long as there is a disturbance of energy, such as that mana disturbance in the distance. Medusa introduced herself and briefly discussed her abilities. It didn't take much effort to summon you. I can say with certainty that I could make about 9 more summonings without any problems. Gilgamesh was about to say more when Eris elbowed him. What's wrong? Eris gave him a sidelong glance and whispered, "Are you sure she's a spirit and not a servant? She may be a bit silly, but she's very beautiful. Did you really just summon her?" "Haha, of course, aren't I incredible?" Gilgamesh was proud of this great achievement. Now he had a cursed spirit to crush those lizard guys traveling in that fortress. Chapter 97, The Servants. I know what's troubling you, but I have no sexual desires, and I feel that my master Gilgamesh has no desire for my body either. Even if he did, I highly doubt it's something he desires to the extent of creating a space for it in his heart. Medusa inclined her emotionless perfect face and responded to Eris's worries. "Did I even ask that?" Eris exclaimed, her white face flushing with embarrassment and the realization of being caught. "Haha. I tend to ignore the fact that, even if you're not jealous, you believe that someone could hide your true worth from my eyes." Gilgamesh turned to Eris and told her directly, "You are my fiancée, your value in my eyes is unparalleled, so don't think of something like that. If you want it, we just have to let time pass to get married." "You? Right now, why do you say such embarrassing things?" Eris shouted before turning around and heading angrily toward her room, but she also seemed somewhat happy. "Medusa, protect her at all times when I'm not around. She is my future wife. I wish I hadn't seen it, but lately, I've been unconsciously using my ability to see the future with her." Gilgamesh returned to his usual self, as if he became softer only in Eris's presence, as if it were some instinctive reaction to her attitude. "If that is your wish, I will watch over her at all times, my lord." Medusa responded with a gentle voice as she disappeared into illusion and her aura headed toward where Eris had run off to. "May I ask who she is?" Ghislaine walked out of the shadows toward Gilgamesh, and the only reason Medusa didn't act against this figure is that she had been in the same spot since she was summoned to this world. She is a spirit, and her name is Medusa. She will be responsible for protecting Eris at all times, no matter the day or hour. Gilgamesh's eyes shone slightly as Ghislaine finally decided to move from her position. "May I ask you a question?" Ghislaine gave Gilgamesh a meaningful look and asked, "Why do you act with more kindness when you're with Eris-sama? What may surprise you is that I do not act in front of her. I respect her, and I have never had any low thoughts when I'm with her. I'm simply becoming that way, and I'm okay with it, but she is very vulnerable." Gilgamesh looked at the darkening sky and said, "I have special eyes, I can see both the past and present of people I choose." Upon hearing that, Ghislaine was like a lightning bolt, looking at Gilgamesh with disbelief and asking, "What did you see?" "I analyzed her future without my presence, and it was truly tragic. If I hadn't appeared in her life, she wouldn't end up marrying me. She would lose her parents in the mana explosion that is forming right now, and then her grandfather would be beheaded after revealing his intentions to use the Grere family fortune to rebuild the Ctto region destroyed in that disaster." Gilgamesh sounded very serious when he said that, but after that point, he decided not to continue looking into Eris's future and certain special people around him. Of course, most of that timeline would never exist in the first place due to my presence. I stopped looking into the future when I knew we got married in the timeline where I exist, nothing more than that. Who beheaded Soro-sama in that future you saw? Ghislaine sat down next to Gilgamesh, her tone sounding normal, but a hint of fury was seeping through her words. Gilgamesh smiled, sat down, and said, "That doesn't matter because I've already killed them. That future doesn't matter because it doesn't exist. When did you acquire this ability?" Ghislaine, now understanding a bit more about the boy beside her, knew that he must have spent many years seeing possible futures and pasts of the people around him. If that's the case, each of his decisions is a choice that will bring him more benefits and a peaceful life in the future. Gilgamesh recalled his past life and replied, "Considering those memories, I was born this way, the perfection of men in life. I am the light that can rule this world if I so choose. I declined when I thought about it, and only the desire to live a peaceful life passed through my heart for a long time, but people won't let me rest." "When did all this start?" He didn't want to be a king, at least that's what he thinks right now. But that part of him that loves humanity and wants to guide it on the right path, educate it, and harness its potential makes him naturally gravitate towards the throne. So why do you want to be king now? Ghislaine might have been the only one who, when Gilgamesh mentioned that he would be king, had a different intention, not seeking power. People don't live the right way in this world, Ghislaine. I see it that way, and it tears at my heart. When I see those nobles revel in their vain power, it makes me want to crush their heads and trample their hearts because around the corner, there's a girl being enslaved, crushing any desire for a life that's just beginning. Gilgamesh smiled and said, maybe that part of me led me towards the throne, where I will guide everyone to a new world where all can be happy. Realms that don't know how to govern according to my principles will be conquered by my banner, and I will make every idiot disappear from power. Ghislaine listened in silence. The only thing she felt deep within her was the urge to cry. Somehow, Gilgamesh's words had touched her deepest side. She looked at the boy beside her, and for a moment, the silhouette of an adult Gilgamesh appeared in her view. She knew that the adult Gilgamesh was sad, but when she thought she was hallucinating, she returned to reality. It's been a long time since I felt this way, Ghislaine. Do you trust me? Gilgamesh looked at Ghislaine. Every word of yours is trustworthy, but I believe that this time, it's not solely your responsibility. I'm sure that by the time you become king, there will be people who support you. Will you be one of them? Of course. Chapter 98, The Changes in the City of Ours. Welcome to the city of ours, a city that has been slowly transformed by our hands. The 4 towers surrounding the city all belong to Uruk. As for the platform floating in the sky, that's the Mage Tower, and it's where we're heading. Kalen looked proudly at the massive floating platform. It had been given to them by Gilgamesh, who had told them it was a temporary place for them to learn magic. A sacred place, a unique site where magic would naturally and progressively flourish. Sylphie gazed at the enormous tower with a mixture of excitement and wonder. She had never seen anything so incredible in her life. In just a few seconds, numerous questions flooded her mind. How does that thing float? How many mages are there in that place? Are all of them mages under Gilgamesh's command? As the ship passed through the clouds, they saw numerous ships unloading what appeared to be large crates of food, books, and many other items. Who are they? Sylphie asked when she noticed a group of children who seemed afraid of their surroundings. Ah, them. Kalen looked toward the port, where dozens of large ships were unloading not only goods but also young children, elderly individuals with magic staffs, and teenagers who appeared to be excited by the sights. They are new recruits for the Mage Tower. These children were trained before coming here to learn magic, as they were once slaves. As for the elderly and the young, they have joined the Mage Tower to enhance their powers and explore magic that is forbidden in other places. Kalen explained with pride. He, a simple mage of Saint class, had become an emperor after being integrated into this tower. It didn't take a genius to understand that this place was unimaginable for any mage, an incredibly prestigious place where one could live and die solely for magic. Both he and everyone else who had come here were here to learn about magic and, above all, to seek new opportunities in their lives. The elderly became teachers, the children became apprentices who spent their days casting unnamed magic and depleting their mana reserves. Those who were formerly slaves would be educated in other basic doctrines while enjoying the rest of the day playing. How many people are here? Sylphie would have wished for Rudius to be in this place, but those thoughts were slowly erased as she remembered her father's words, where he said that everyone had an adventure waiting for them and that there were amazing things in every corner of the world. No more than 15,000. You should know that most adult mages are in buildings or libraries, learning magic, while others are in training chambers, and the rest are simply teaching the younger ones. Kalen replied as he disembarked from the ship along with the knights and the body of the woman who had been a human god's apostle. Sylphie had so many questions, but she limited herself to asking the most basic ones, so she continued, Are they all mages? Kalen smiled and shook his head. No, of course not. There are cooks, tutors, masters of other doctrines, and guardians to protect the younger children. As they arrived at the floating platform known simply as the Mage Tower, interesting things were about to begin for them, and even more astonishing things were happening elsewhere. City of Roa, several months later. Gilgamesh stood atop a mountain overlooking a massive construction that was nearing completion on its exterior. This structure was a fortress hidden amidst towering mountains. This place would be where most people would be relocated before the magical eruption, which was estimated to occur in about a year, perhaps sooner according to Gilgamesh's calculations. In the area, there were mages, mercenaries, and knights, along with workers who were diligently following the construction plans as Gilgamesh had instructed. Why does this structure look so strange? Rudius asked. Since the last time he had spoken with Gilgamesh, he had become somewhat reserved in his behavior, both towards Gilgamesh and Eris. Don't be silly. This structure is a dome that surrounds what's inside. Even though it may look basic from the outside, inside that place is an incredible area where everyone would wish to live for the rest of their lives. Eris replied, dressed in much lighter clothing. I still think it's just a strange-looking ball. Do you know why they're building this in the middle of nowhere? Rudius didn't understand why so much effort was being put into constructing this place in such a hidden and remote location. I have no idea, but there must be an explanation for it, Eris said as she glanced at Gilgamesh, who was unusually silent. In the distance, Gilgamesh frowned as he watched a heavily armored woman carrying large wooden crates while engaging in a stamina race with a man in the same location. That woman was Amy, one of the spirits summoned by Gilgamesh and one of the most troublesome among the 9 spirits he had brought to this world. Medusa, have you analyzed a way to prevent the mana explosion from damaging the surroundings of this place? Gilgamesh asked as he considered the various possibilities. My lord, if you were to ask Flora to use her magic to reinforce the structure and then somehow create a barrier to contain magical attacks, we could potentially mitigate the final waves of damage. Medusa replied with her indifferent voice. Gilgamesh sighed and said, in the best-case scenario, I'll deflect that energy with my best attack. Perhaps I can maintain the state of half of Ctto if I do it that way. That is also a plausible idea within the realm of possibilities, Master. Medusa replied with a hint of amusement in her voice. Gilgamesh, can we go inside and take a look? Eris approached slowly, attempting to catch Gilgamesh's attention as he was conversing with his spirit. Of course, let me give you a tour, Gilgamesh nodded as he descended the main stairs leading to the entrance of the fortress. Chapter 99, A New Way to Look. This structure is pure engineering, and with the skill of magic, the masters who created this place achieved the impossible. Gilgamesh walked with his hands behind his back, his gaze focused on the massive structure that, from a distance, looked small, giving everyone an understanding of how incredible this place was. Inside, the place was much more incredible than anyone could imagine. It was like a mini-city with enormous buildings inside, and the sky, which should have been covered by huge ceilings, was constructed in a way that there were rectangular glass panels that provided both light and darkness. It was simply breathtaking to see what was being built by thousands of people. The sky was clear, there was vegetation, and drainage beneath the ground. In addition to that, there were rivers where rainwater flowed through the entire hidden mini-city under a dome. For what purpose is this being built? Eris asked the same question as she looked at Gilgamesh walking ahead. Well, I don't know, we are preparing for a complete reconstruction of Roa, so this city will be a temporary replacement where the people of Roa can live in the meantime. Gilgamesh smiled mysteriously as his eyes turned to Rudius, who was standing beside Eris. That sounds very interesting, Rudius said with a frown. A fortune must have been spent on this place. There's nothing like having money to spend it on anything that comes to mind. The money Rudius was talking about wasn't estimated to be much. Most of the materials were obtained from these same mountains with the help of mages. The processing of the materials was handled by the older slaves that Gilgamesh had bought, and everything else was left to the contracted workers. After a long tour of the place, Gilgamesh spoke, "Amy, stop playing around and come here." Boom! A burst of air was felt as Amy appeared beside Gilgamesh in her heavy armor. She usually stayed in this place, and besides protecting the area, she made sure there were no problems. "What are your orders, my lord?" Amy asked respectfully. "I want you to tell Flora that after finishing what she's doing, she should take care of the rest. Don't let her sleep anywhere and hit her if she investigates weird things again," Gilgamesh said in a tired tone. This solo trip was just to pass the time. Gilgamesh had lived for over 50 years if you considered his past lives. So, as someone who had lived so long with experiences far beyond any other human, his mental age prevented him from enjoying most of the things a child would do. That's why he spent most of his time training his soldiers, looking for any trace of the human god in books, and teaching Eris her new combat style, which she was learning herself. The little time he spent with Eris, they talked about things that had happened in their days. Maybe it was too boring, but being in one place for a long time, things couldn't be that interesting. If Gilgamesh were an ordinary human, he might have found many of the things around him interesting. However, he had no need to train, let alone learn, because his strength was so great that all he did was rest. "Your orders will be communicated, my lord." Amy bowed respectfully and disappeared from everyone's view. "Very well, let's go back." Gilgamesh glanced at Eris and, after lightly touching her head, continued walking back to the exit. Rudius remained silent as he watched that heavily armored figure move incredibly fast, something he hadn't seen in anyone else. Undoubtedly, there were things much more interesting than magic. In his view, Gilgamesh was somehow different from the others, and the strength that followed him was far superior. He didn't know if this level of power was what princes and princesses in this kingdom enjoyed, but it was certainly very impressive. "I guess what you can do will be impossible for me to achieve," Rudius muttered as he walked far behind Eris and Gilgamesh. Eris Grere's birthday party was just around the corner, so preparations started much earlier than planned. As expected, the response letters from many prestigious noble figures arrived almost immediately, accepting the invitation to the Noto's family's birthday party in Ctto. Knowing that the guests would be prestigious, Gilgamesh also wanted to match the quality of the party and decided to take charge of all the organizational events. Of course, apart from the beautifully remembered venue, there were numerous tables specifying the seat of each guest. The most curious thing was that in the center of this birthday party, there was a battle platform, designed with motifs of combat. Anyone who saw this specific area would wonder what the meaning of this was. "Ha ha ha, all those nobles will cry at my dear granddaughter's birthday party." Soros, who was discussing this with his son, couldn't help but laugh at what was about to happen. As a noble, he had seen Gilgamesh's capabilities up close, as well as all of his subordinates who had come to this mansion. There was no possibility of anyone trying to harm him, they wouldn't even dream of challenging his authority. "I hope no one dies that night, it wouldn't be good at all." Philip was very calm but also expressed his concern on this occasion. "Don't be a coward, we'll clean the kingdom of those damn bastards who only want to drink," Soros said hypothetically as he drank from a large bottle of wine. Chapter 100, A Special Ceremony. Turning 10 years old is a special occasion, and according to noble customs, birthdays at ages 5, 10, and 15 should be celebrated with grand parties. Therefore, the mansion's courtyard would be open to receive gifts from the citizens, and nobles from the city would also be invited to attend. That's what would have happened if this birthday party were ordinary. However, because the official engagement between Eris Grere and Gilgamesh Azura would be announced, additional noble invitations were sent, with some attending merely out of curiosity to find out what the prince had been doing during his year at the Grere mansion. Initially, due to Soros being a coarse and pragmatic person, the original plan was to have a free buffet-style party with plenty of wine. However, Philip intercepted that plan and changed it to a dance, reasoning that it would make it easier for nobles to attend. However, Gilgamesh had proposed that instead of a boring, standard dance where everyone followed the same aesthetics, there would be a fight instead. Who would engage in this combat? Of course, it would be Gilgamesh against Eris, showcasing his new combat style that would surpass any other sword style. The Golden Lion sword style, one that combined perfect fighting, defense, movement, and long-range attacks. A style reserved only for members of the Tower of Uruk, as anyone else who used this sword style and did not belong to this organization would be killed immediately. But concerning the party, in the days leading up to the date, the person facing the most headaches was Eris. Because she was incapable of dancing, not even the simplest of dances. It's a serious problem when the leading actress can't dance. These were the words of the servants in the mansion, which gave Gilgamesh the idea to completely change the boring customs for something much more interesting. Nobles fear the unknown, which is why Gilgamesh would leave a deep impression on their minds. They would be the voice that spread rumors, so by the time Gilgamesh took over this place's problems, everyone in the kingdom would know about his engagement. It might sound more normal than it seems, but that engagement would bring certain waves of chaos, considering that the Noto's family supports Prince Grabble's faction. What do you think will be the consequences of the fourth prince now being connected to Eris Grere? Of course, a clear division of power. After the preparations had started, 5 weeks had passed, and finally, the long-awaited party date had arrived. Boom! Eris collided with Gilgamesh, her sword covered in a unique golden aura from the Golden Lion sword style. 9 powerful techniques, a single combat method to resolve any type of enemy. On every occasion when Eris swung at Gilgamesh, she was repelled with double the force, causing her small body to stagger back, her sword nearly slipping from her hands. Boom! 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 A beautiful sound of swords clashing echoed in the private training room that had been constructed by one of the spirits Gilgamesh had summoned to this world. That's enough, your training with the Golden Lion sword style ends today. What follows will be done on your own. You've learned all the techniques, so now it's a matter of improving your precision, strength, and battle aura. In a few minutes, you should go prepare to receive the guests. Although Gilgamesh spoke to Eris in a stern tone, he was actually struggling to hide his surprise. Eris Grere was an incredible swordswoman, and her potential was truly formidable. She mastered all 9 sword techniques, even though she can only execute 3 of them decently. Within her learning, she has met my expectations. Eris has been blessed with great sword handling ability, it's in her blood. But whatever happens in the future, her strength is still too weak. Gilgamesh had seen much of the future, and there was nothing suspicious before the mana explosion. However, he couldn't let his guard down against annoying enemies who, although they couldn't harm him, could potentially harm Eris. At that point, he might take the search for the human god more seriously. However, even though he wasn't currently focused on the search for that troublesome god, he was spending his time peacefully, which didn't bother him. In fact, it reminded him of his previous life when he was a king. What mattered most to him right now was laying the foundation for a peaceful place where anyone could step forward and solve problems without him having to be bothered. After Eris's birthday was announced, Gilgamesh made 1,000,000 gifts, all in the city of Roa. They were gold coins with his adult face printed on them. These coins were special, as anyone who possessed one could take a ride on a floating ship and visit a magical place. Gilgamesh didn't mind losing millions of coins. In fact, this plan was designed so that on the day of the magical catastrophe, most of the citizens living here could at least save their lives. Gilgamesh had seen a future where he completely eliminated the anomaly in the sky, and half of Ctto, including the entire city of Roa, was pulverized, leaving those who survived with severe injuries. Everything was chaos, so Gilgamesh at least wanted to prevent that if there were even bigger problems in the future. There was something special in him that hadn't changed even after living many years here, and that was his love for humans. He knew they only needed a good leader to guide them down the right path. So, Gilgamesh would do that without fail, preparing for everything to be done absolutely right. Of course, not everyone would receive that coin, as Gilgamesh needed victims to unmask the nobility and let the world see the faces of their rulers. Eris wiped away the sweat, and her body had grown much more than it would have even without undergoing a blood ritual. She had a figure that would draw the attention of many, but to Gilgamesh, she was just another beautiful girl, a flower that had not yet fully blossomed and would lose its beauty if touched. Eris. Yes, Gil. Remember that from today, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to shine for others because in my eyes, you'll be something greater than any diamond. Today, our engagement is announced, so I will take care of you as much as possible. Eris's ears turned as red as a tomato, but she kept her composure and nodded. Although she would usually blush or shy away from Gilgamesh's presence, this time, she stayed and showed a completely different expression from her usual self. An expression that matched Gilgamesh's stature, given their respective proportions. Today, will our engagement finally be officially announced? Eris continued to wipe the sweat from her neck with a faint smile. In Gilgamesh's eyes, she had been influenced by his aura. Although he had kept a certain distance in his interactions with Eris, he knew that this could happen, and he didn't really mind. Though it might sound harsh, the status a woman can achieve by marrying a king is a direct step to the top. Envy and admiration would surround her, and it was her job to maintain her dignity and prove herself worthy of the man she had married. Gilgamesh was a natural ruler, the most powerful in the world, and a man who had never experienced these things before. So, in his eyes, the status Eris would receive was unparalleled. By the way, I have prepared an unparalleled gift, Gilgamesh said as he approached Eris. What do you plan to give me? Eris's refined voice, without a hint of embarrassment, addressed Gilgamesh, who was getting closer. Gilgamesh's smile, charisma, and handsome face drew closer and closer to Eris, who remained indifferent, but her heart was beating faster and faster, something Gilgamesh noticed. So, when he was close to her face, he turned slightly and whispered in her ear, I will give it to you in front of everyone. This gift will be incredibly beautiful, and you'll love it. After saying that, Gilgamesh left the private training room and said, Don't be late, the guests are arriving. When Eris finally heard Gilgamesh leave the room, she let out a long sigh and murmured with a blushing face, Damn Gilgamesh, how can you do that without getting nervous?